Hello, and welcome to Science for Sleep. Tonight, we're stepping into the quiet, mysterious world of plants. A place where trees might be talking to us behind our backs, while leaves listen and roots investigate. It's a slow-motion universe that is full of light, chemistry, and clever little tricks that come together in one patient moment at a time. I hope this video isn't too interesting, though if it does happen to keep you awake at least you'll be learning something fascinating in the process. Not the worst way to spend a sleepless night. Before we begin, if you enjoy drifting off to the gentle hum of science, I'd be very grateful if you tap the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps more sleepy minds find their way here. And while you're settling in, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Feel free to share it in the comments. It's always wonderful to see how far these quiet little journeys reach. Get cozy then. Relax your shoulders. Let your thoughts slow down like a time lapse of a sunflower turning toward the morning light. And just a soft reminder before we begin. This video is intended for relaxation purposes only. It's not intended as medical advice, a cure for insomnia, or a replacement for speaking kindly to your houseplants. Though that last one is always encouraged. Let's begin. It's easy to undervalue plants. They don't pace or pounce. They do not scurry off into the underbrush, blink, or bark. They just sit there quietly, greenly. But if you take a closer look, really stop and notice, you'll find that plants are more than just pretty things that live in the background. They're astonishingly complex, beautifully structured, and incredibly resourceful. Their bodies, although slow-moving and silent to our eyes, are finely tuned systems built for survival, adaptation, and subtle interaction with the world around them. Let's begin appropriately with the basics. What exactly is a plant made of? More specifically, how does its body function in a world where moving an inch per day is considered quite athletic? To start, plants are made up of three main organs: roots, stems, and leaves. These parts work together in an elegant, interdependent dance of water, nutrients, sunlight, and growth. Though they may seem simple on the outside, each of these parts performs a suite of tasks that keep the plant alive and thriving. Roots are the unsung heroes of the plant world. Hidden underground, they anchor the plant in place, soaking up water and minerals from the soil like an ever-thirsty sponge. But they don't just sit there absorbing. They explore. Roots can sense gravity, moisture, gradients, and even physical barriers. They grow toward nutrients and away from toxins. And when they come across obstacles in the soil, they make choices, branching around rocks, slowing down in compacted earth, or sending signals upward to adjust growth strategies above ground. A single tree, like an old oak or a slender birch, can have a root system that extends far beyond the tree's canopy and can be as wide as 2 or 3 times wider than the tree's height. That underground architecture is complex, sprawling, and responsive. The roots of neighboring plants, in some instances, even fuse together, forming natural grafts that allow them to share resources. The stem, or more broadly, the shoot system, comes next. This is the above-ground structure that includes stems, limbs, blossoms, and fruit. The stem has a few key roles. It holds up the plant's leaves to the light. It transports fluids and nutrients between the roots and leaves. And in many cases, it serves as a storage system, like in the thick water fill stems of cacti, or the sugarcane stalks, which are high in carbs. Inside the stem, 2 main transport systems run like biological highways. These are the xylem and the phi. The xylem carries water and minerals upward from the roots to the leaves. It's a one-way street powered by the remarkable process of transpiration, where water pulls more water up from below and evaporates from the leaves. Almost like sipping through a straw made of living material. The phloem, on the other hand, is more like a two-way street. It transports sugars and other organic molecules created during photosynthesis down from the leaves to the rest of the plant. This allows nutrients to be delivered to the growing tips, storage organs, and roots. Think of it as the plant's postal service, quietly transporting energy to locations where it is most needed. But the stars of the show are arguably the leaves. Leaves are a marvel of natural engineering. They're designed to capture sunlight, absorb carbon dioxide from the air, and produce glucose through the process of photosynthesis. Their flat, broad surfaces maximize exposure to sunlight while tiny pores on. Their undersides, called stomata, allow gases to enter and exit in a tightly regulated exchange. These stomata can open and close depending on conditions like humidity, temperature, and carbon dioxide levels, helping the plant conserve water while still breathing. Inside the leaf, chloroplasts, those little green organelles, work tirelessly. They contain chlorophyll, the pigment in plants that takes in sunlight's energy and gives them their green color. With sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water, the chloroplasts perform photosynthesis, converting light energy into chemical energy that powers the entire plant and, incidentally, produces oxygen as a byproduct, something the rest of us are extremely grateful for. If you look closely at the shape and structure of leaves across different plant species, you'll see an incredible variety of forms, each adapted to its environment. Focused on conifers like pine trees reduce surface area to conserve water in cold, dry climates. Broad banana leaves capture maximum light in tropical jungles. The fleshy leaves of succulents store water in arid deserts. Each shape tells a story about the environment in which the plant lives and how it has solved the puzzle of staying alive there. And this architecture isn't static. Plants are capable of something called phenotypic plasticity, which is a fancy way of saying they can adjust their body form in response to their surroundings. A single species of plant might grow tall and leggy in the shade, or short and bushy in full sun, depending on how much light it gets. Roots will get deeper. When nutrients are scarce, either dry the soil or spread it out. Of course, these are not deliberate choices, but they are far from random. All of this is a finely tuned feedback loop that connects the plant to its surroundings. Some plants have evolved, especially unusual body parts for very specific purposes. Take, for instance, tendrils, which are the slender spiral structures on climbing plants like grapes, and peas. These act like plant fingers wrapping around supports and helping the plant reach upward toward the light. Or consider the thorns on a rose bush or the spines of cactus. These are modified leaves or stems that keep would-be predators at bay, keeping away grazers. Then there are the bulbs and tubers, which are stored underground. Units. A potato, for example, is a swollen underground stem packed with energy reserves. It may not look like much, but it's a sophisticated survival tool, allowing the plant to endure tough seasons and grow again when the time is right. Onions, garlic, and tulips use similar strategies, storing energy in bulbs for a rainy day, or rather a sunny spring. Of course, no discussion of plant bodies would be complete without mentioning flowers. These reproductive structures are as practical as they are beautiful. Petals, often brightly colored and aromatic, are designed to attract pollinators, bees, birds, bats, beetles, even the occasional wind gust. Pollen is produced within the flower and distributed to other plants for fertilization, which results in the formation of fruit and seeds. Fruit, biologically speaking, is simply a mature ovary, but evolution has dressed it up in all sorts of appealing ways to encourage animals, including humans, to help disperse seeds. From the snagburrs that cling to your socks to the juicy berries we snack on, plants have developed countless strategies to send their next generation out into the world. Even within a single plant's lifetime, there's an immense amount of flexibility and subtlety in how its body develops. Many plants exhibit what's called indeterminate growth, which means they can grow as long as the conditions are right. Unlike animals whose body plans are largely fixed after a certain age, plants keep building new structures, new leaves, new stems, new roots throughout their lives. And they do it all with a kind of quiet elegance. No nerves, no muscles, no central brain. Just a network of cells communicating physically and chemically, making gradual, deliberate adjustments to the world. If you speed up time, say through a time-lapse camera, the full choreography becomes visible. You'd observe roots twirling and leaves turning to follow the sun. Through the earth, flowers opening with a slow-motion sigh. It's a silent symphony of motion, just played in a different key. Therefore, even though a plant might not wag its tail or respond to a call, it's very much alive. Its body is busy sensing, building, and balancing using a toolkit refined over hundreds of millions of years. The plant body is an engineer's dream in many ways. Self-building, solar-powered, and able to recycle its own parts. It is capable of air, anchors soil, makes sugar out of sunlight, and create its own food without ever leaving the house. And perhaps most wonderfully, it does all of this without needing to be in a hurry. There's no haste, no panic, just a steady effort to reach for the sun and a gradual stretching of cells and a serene assurance that it is precisely where it needs to be. Now, that's a body worth appreciating. If you've ever looked at a potted plant and thought, well, it's nice, but it's not exactly thinking about anything, you're not alone. For centuries, plants were seen as little more than passive. Green devices, sunlight in, oxygen out, and not much going on in between. But recent research has been quietly shaking up that perception. Plants, it turns out, are much more aware of their surroundings than we had previously thought. They don't have brains or nervous systems like animals do, but they can sense, respond, remember, and even make decisions in ways that challenge our traditional ideas of intelligence. Let's begin with the term plant intelligence, which frequently raises questions. It sounds like the title of a children's science fiction novel, but it's actually a serious field of study. Researchers have been exploring whether plants possess something akin to a distributed intelligence, a system of, instead of being centralized in a brain, their information processing was distributed throughout their tissues. This doesn't mean that plants are thinking deep thoughts about the meaning of life or composing poetry and chlorophyll, but it does mean they're remarkably good at solving problems, adapting to challenges, and making strategic decisions. One of the first clues to this came from experiments with plants that can climb. Let's take the humble pea plant. When grown near support, like a stick or a pole, the plant will send out tendrils and begin to curl toward it. That's no surprise. It's what climbing plants do. But researchers noticed something more subtle. If they moved the support, the plant adjusted its growth pattern. And if two supports were offered, one short and close, one tall and far, the plant seemed to evaluate both options before committing, often choosing the one that offered the best long-term support. This isn't just automatic reflex. It's conditional behavior based on assessment. But how exactly does a plant make a decision without a brain? Well, plants use complex biochemical networks to manage information. They have hormones that act as messengers, signaling molecules that travel through their tissues and even electrical impulses that move from cell to cell. In fact, some plants have been shown to transmit electrical signals at speeds similar to those found in animal nerves, albeit without actual neurons. One famous example involves the mimosa plant. Mimosa potica, also referred to as the sensitive plant because of its dramatic response to touch. It folds when one of its leaves is gently tapped. Up almost instantly, a kind of botanical flinch. Scientists once thought this was just a mechanical reaction, but in a series of clever experiments, the plants of mimosa were repeatedly dropped from a low height by researchers without causing physical damage. At first, the plants folded their leaves in response as expected, but over time they stopped reacting. They had learned that the drop wasn't harmful, and they stopped wasting energy on unnecessary responses. In addition, they kept this memory for a number of weeks. The plants had essentially remembered an experience and adjusted their behavior accordingly. This type of habituation, a reduction in response to a repeated harmless stimulus, is a basic form of learning. And yet it occurred in an organism with no brain, no neurons, and no traditional memory centers. Experiments with maze-like environments provide yet another intriguing illustration. In one study, scientists placed plants in a Y-shaped chamber with a light source at one end. The plants consistently grew toward the light, as you'd expect, but then the light was removed and replaced with a fan. The plant does not benefit from it on its own, but during training, it was used in conjunction with the light. And now, in the absence of the light, the plant still grew toward the fan. In other words, the plant had learned to associate the fan with the light, a process that is strikingly similar to classical animal conditioning. Now, let's be clear before we begin awarding honorary diplomas to firefighters. Plant intelligence is different from animal intelligence. Plants don't have consciousness in the way we do. They don't have any self-awareness, internal narratives, or little green thoughts that are whirling around in their imaginary minds. What they do have is an incredible ability to sense, analyze, and react to their environment, all using systems entirely their own. One of those systems is chemical communication. Plants are masters of chemical messaging. They release compounds into the soil and air, frequently in surprising and unique ways. If an animal chews on a leaf, insect, the plant can release airborne chemicals that signal other parts of the same plant and even neighboring plants to prepare for attack. The production of bitter or hazardous compounds that contribute to the leaves less tasty to would-be grazers. In some species, the signal is so specific that it can identify the type of attacker. A tomato plant being nibbled by caterpillars, for instance, will produce different chemicals than one being poked by aphids. These chemical warnings aren't just random distress calls. They're targeted messages shaped by millions of years of evolutionary arms races. But perhaps even more, the ability of plants to allocate their resources is amazing. Imagine your sunflower growing in a crowded field. To your left, there's shade. To your right, there's more sunlight, but also a plant that is taller. You can't move from where you are, but you can change how you grow. So you lean slightly toward the light, stretch your stem to rise above your neighbor, and root energy from root growth to support your towering ambition. These choices are made by a lot of people. Green executive somewhere inside the stalk. They're the result of feedback systems that are not centralized. Chemical signals that the soil is a little bit dry or that there is more light here, and the plant's tissues respond accordingly. It's more like 1,000 brains making decisions than a brain. Tiny sensors adjusting the sails on a very quiet ship. Even root growth is astonishingly strategic. Roots don't just grow through the soil at random. They explore, they compare, and they remember. If a root encounters a patch of nutrient-rich soil, it branches out, maximizing absorption. If it hits a dry or toxic area, it diverts. Some studies have shown that roots can even recognize their own kin, same species plants, and exhibit less competitive behavior when growing near them. When surrounded by strangers, they may expand more aggressively, seeking to out-compete. When surrounded by relatives, as they typically behave nicely. A social awareness, albeit of very limited kind, is suggested by this kin recognition, different one from ours. It's not emotional, but it is responsive. Plants also use light detection to respond to the presence of other plants. They can sense changes in the ratio of red to far red light, which tells them whether they're being shaded by others. If they detect too much far red light, an indicator that taller neighbors are blocking sunlight, they ramp up stem elongation in an attempt to get ahead. As a result, plants and their neighbors become intertwined slow-motion jewels that subtly alter shape and employ a strategy based on minute changes in light and chemical signals. It's not aggressive exactly, but it's definitely competitive. There's also growing evidence that plants exhibit what some researchers call anticipatory behavior. Basically, they don't just react, they prepare. In fluctuating environments, some plants have been shown to anticipate the return of regular stresses like grazing or drought, and they change their internal chemistry in advance. This isn't quite memory in the human sense, but it's memory-like. a biological record of past events that influences future behavior. This brings us to perhaps the most fascinating concept of all: distributed intelligence. Unlike animals, which rely on a central nervous system, plants process information in a decentralized way. Every root tip, every leaf cell, every growth point is both a sensor and a responder. There is no headquarters. Instead, intelligence is distributed across the organism in the form of a network. It's similar to a cell democracy in that decisions are made by combining the contributions of many parts than a single ruthless mind. Additionally, in some ways, this greatly benefits plants. Resilient. The entire system may fail in the event of brain damage in an animal. But if a plant loses a branch or even most of its body, it can often recover, regrow, and reconfigure itself. Its intelligence is not confined geographically. It's built into the structure of its being. So the next time you pass a tree or water your houseplant, consider this. You're looking at a living system that senses, responds, assesses, and adjusts. It may not greet you or write a haiku, but it knows more about its world than we give it credit for. It remembers where the sun comes up. It knows when danger is near. It chooses where to grow and when to wait. It turns out that intelligence comes from in numerous forms. Some of them green, some of them silent, and some of them swaying gently in the breeze, outsmarting the world, one slow decision at a time. If you could shrink yourself down and slip into the soil beneath your feet, you'd find yourself in a bustling underground, thriving metropolis with a plethora of signals and trade routes, alliances, and even a little bit of undertow. Even though we can see stillness above ground, the root systems of plants form vast dynamic networks that reach out, communicate, and interact with the world and with each other in surprisingly sophisticated ways. Roots are more than just thirsty tentacles searching for water. They are the plant's foundation, both physically and biologically. They anchor the organism in place, absorb nutrients, and serve as a front line sensor array, constantly tasting the soil and reporting back. But they also interact with other roots, microorganisms, fungi, and chemicals in the soil in ways that begin to look an awful lot like social behavior. One of the most fascinating aspects of root biology is how plants work with fungi. Not just any fungi, mind you, but special ones that live in a deeply entwined partnership with plant roots. These are known as mycorrhizal fungi, and they form what's called a mutualistic symbiosis. To put it simply, both parties benefit from the relationship. The fungi wrap themselves around or sometimes even into the plant's roots, creating an interface through which nutrients can be exchanged. The fungi deliver hard-to-reach minerals, especially phosphorus and nitrogen, from the surrounding soil. In return, the plant pays them in sugar, glucose produced through photosynthesis in its leaves and delivered down into the roots. It's a cozy long-term trade agreement, and it's incredibly common. In fact, scientists estimate that over 90% of all land plants engage in some form of mycorrhizal relationship. Without fungi, many plants would struggle to obtain sufficient nutrients, particularly in poor soils. And without plants, the fungi would lack their main energy source. This partnership forms the backbone of what some scientists have dubbed the Wood Wide Web. It's a huge underground communication and resource sharing network that connects not just individual plants, but entire communities. Through their fumble partners, trees and other plants can pass chemical signals and even share nutrients with their neighbors. Imagine a forest full of trees. Each one stands tall, individual, but below ground their roots and fungal networks are intertwined. If one tree is attacked by insects or begins to dry out from drought, it may send warning signals through the fungal network. Nearby trees, upon receiving the alert, can prepare by boosting their own chemical defenses or closing their stomata to conserve water. It's not telepathy, it's biology, but it looks remarkably like a community looking out for its own. In some cases, this sharing goes beyond mere warnings. In the nutrient-poor conditions, it has been observed that some trees transfer sugars or nitrogen to other trees through these fungal connections. It makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint that sometimes the recipients are their own seedlings. They're helping their genetic offspring survive, but other times the generosity seems to extend to unrelated neighbors. Older, established trees have even been shown to support young saplings that are shaded and unable to photosynthesize independently and effectively. These generous elders are often referred to as mother trees. They tend to be large, mature individuals with vast root and fungal networks that extend through the forest floor. Their ability to support other trees may not be entirely altruistic. After all, the forest can benefit from maintaining a healthy understory as a whole, and therefore good for the mother tree's own long-term success. However, it definitely challenges the concept of plants as strictly independent individuals. Not all root interactions are so harmonious, though. The underground world is just as competitive as it is cooperative. Plants growing in close quarters often compete fiercely for space, water, and nutrients. Some will even release chemical compounds into the soil to prevent competitors from growing nearby, a process called allelopathy. Black walnut trees are notorious for this. Their roots exude a compound called juglone, which is toxic to many other plant species. This gives the walnut tree a competitive edge by reducing the number of rivals that can develop nearby. It's a bit like throwing shade at your neighbors, but chemically. Even among kin, the level of cooperation can vary. Although some plants appear to recognize their relatives and dial down their competitive behaviors, others ramp up the rivalry if resources are scarce. It's a complex dance of competition and cooperation, with the outcome shaped by context, species, and environmental conditions. Roots are sensory organs in and of themselves. They could detect gradients of water, nutrient concentrations, soil texture, pH levels, and even mechanical barriers like rocks or compacted earth. If you were to watch a root grow in time-lapse, you'd see it exploring, probing, pausing, and redirecting, almost like a curious worm feeling its way forward. This is not a random process. Roots grow toward areas of higher nutrient content and water availability, and they avoid toxic or barren zones. There's even evidence that roots can listen. Plants have been subjected by scientists to the in-controlled experiments, sound of running water without any actual water present, and found that roots grow toward the sound. This suggests that plants can detect vibrations and use them to guide their growth. The mechanism isn't fully understood, but it likely involves tiny mechanoreceptors, cells that respond to pressure or movement distributed along the top of the root. In some experiments, roots were also able to detect the presence of other roots nearby even before physically touching them. They seem to respond differently depending on whether the neighboring root belonged to the same plant, a genetic relative, or a completely unrelated individual. This suggests a level of recognition and response that's hard to dismiss as coincidence. Roots also play a central role in plant immune systems. When a pathogen is detected in the soil, the roots can mount a defense response, releasing antimicrobial compounds, altering their growth patterns, or even calling in help from beneficial microbes. Some plants maintain symbiotic relationships not just with fungi, but also with bacteria that help fix nitrogen or protect disease. Root nodules are special structures found in legumes like beans and peas. House nitrogen-fixing bacteria that convert atmospheric nitrogen into a form the plant can use. It is a neat little underground factory working full-time to feed the plant. This kind of teamwork in biology is more than just fascinating. It's essential for ecosystems. The condition of entire forests, grasslands, and even deserts frequently depends on what takes place below the surface. Surface to determine whether the microbial partners of the root systems are flourishing. The plants above are more resilient to drought, disease, and environmental stress. But when these underground networks are disrupted by soil, compaction, pollution, or deforestation, the entire ecosystem can falter. In agricultural settings, this understanding has led to a resurgence of interest in soil health. Farmers and gardeners are paying more attention to the effects of tilling, applying fertilizer, and applying pesticides on the underground world. Reduced tillage, crop rotation, and cover cropping all aid in the maintenance of root networks and provide beneficial bacteria and fungi. In a way, it's a return to a more respectful partnership with the soil, recognizing that what we do above ground echoes below. The complexity of these new technologies have even been influenced by underground networks. Engineers and scientists are investigating root systems and fungal networks as models for decentralized systems like internet architecture and robotics. After all, a network that is capable of self-repair, growth, adaptation, and root any central control is a pretty compelling blueprint. But beyond the scientific implications, there's something quietly profound about knowing that under every forest path, garden bed, and city park, there's a living web of roots and fungi, whispering to each other, passing notes, sharing meals, and occasionally engaging in a bit of strategic sabotage. It's a reminder that the world beneath, the world above us, is just as alive and interconnected as our feet. So the next time you walk through, whether you sit in the grass or under a tree, keep in mind that you are standing on top of a vast, largely unnoticed network of relationships, rooted in cooperation, rivalry, communication, and memory. It may be silent. Although it may be concealed, it is never still. It's easy to think of plants as passive participants in the sensory environment. They do not possess eyes, noses, or ears, no fingers to touch with, no tongues to taste. But what if? That's only because we're looking for our own senses in all the wrong places. While plants lack the organs we associate with perception, they've developed their own suite of sophisticated ways to gather information from their surroundings. They can sense touch, gravity, and light, temperature, moisture, and even sound. They are able to tell when their neighbors and they're being nibbled on nearby, and when the days are getting longer or shorter. In fact, plants may be some of the most observant organisms on Earth, just on a time scale and wavelength we're not used to noticing. Let's begin with sight, or at least something quite like it. While plants don't have eyes, they're extremely good at detecting light. Not just whether it's present, but how much there is, how it appears, how long it lasts, and even its color. That is thanks to a range of light-sensitive proteins that act like internal photoreceptors. One of the key players is a group of proteins called phytochromes. These molecules can detect red and far red light, and they assist plants in determining the light's quality. Why is that useful? Well, when light passes through a canopy, the red wavelengths are absorbed by the upper leaves while the far red wavelengths pass through. If a plant detects a higher ratio of far red light, it responds by growing taller in an effort to reach the sun because it is aware that it is being shaded by other plants. In crowded conditions, many young plants appear to stretch toward the light, a phenomenon known as a shade avoidance. They're not just growing randomly. They're interpreting the quality of the light and making architectural decisions in line with this. Cryptochromes and phototropins are two additional photoreceptors that plants use to detect blue light, which helps regulate everything from seedling development to stomachal opening to leaf positioning. That's right, leaves adjust themselves to optimize exposure to sunlight. In some species, they even track the movement of the sun across the sky in a process called heliotropism. Imagine a sunflower's face slowly turning east to west following the golden arc of the sun. It's not just for dramatic effect. It's a very real solar tracking strategy to maximize photosynthesis. Then there's the question of circadian rhythms. Just like humans and animals, plants have internal clocks that run on roughly 24-hour cycles. These circadian rhythms allow them to anticipate changes in the environment, such as sunrise and sunset, even when kept in total darkness. Plants continue to follow these rhythms for several days, suggesting that their sense of time is deeply ingrained. These internal clocks help regulate processes like leaf movement, flower opening, and hormone production. For example, some plants open their flowers at specific times of day to align with the activity patterns of their preferred pollinators. When photosynthesis is not taking place, some animals close their stomata at night to conserve water. It's a quiet, invisible rhythm, but it governs much of a plant's daily life. Now let's talk about touch. While plants can't reach out and feel things the way we can, they're highly sensitive to physical contact. This ability is referred to as thigotropism. It is demonstrated when a vine encircles a trellis or when a tendril curls after brushing against a surface. The speed and direction of this movement vary, depending on the species and the stimulus, but the underlying mechanism is the same. Mechanical stimulation triggers a cascade of biochemical signals that accelerate the growth of cells on one side of the structure over those on the other, resulting in a bend. The mimosa is perhaps the most well-known plant with touch sensitivity. Mimosa potica, if you brush against its leaves, they fold inward almost instantly. This rapid movement is driven by changes in turgor pressure, the pressure of water inside plant cells. Specialized cells at the base of the leaflet suddenly lose water, causing them to collapse and the leaf to fold. This reaction may help deter herbivores or shake off small insects, and the plant can recover and reopen its leaves within minutes. Some carnivorous plants also respond quickly to touch. The Venus flytrap, for instance, has tiny trigger hairs that are located within its leaf lobes. When an unsuspecting insect brushes against these hairs twice, within about 20 seconds, the trap snaps shut. It's a type of mechanosensation that occurs here. Surprisingly precise. The plant doesn't waste energy on false alarms. Only a genuine repeated touch will activate the trap. But touch isn't the only way plants detect movement. There's emerging evidence that plants are also capable of hearing. Yes, sound. While they don't have, they can respond to air and soil vibrations with their ears. In laboratory studies, roots have been shown to grow toward the sound of running water, even when no moisture is present. Other studies suggest that plants can alter their growth or chemical production by distinguishing between various sound frequencies. Production and response. This might sound like science fiction, but the logic is grounded in physics. Sound is just vibration, and plants are full of mechanoreceptors that can detect pressure changes. Some researchers believe this sensitivity could help plants locate underground water sources or respond to the chewing sounds of herbivores. Imagine a leaf quietly listening for the tiny crunch of caterpillar jaws. Speaking of chewed leaves, that brings us to one of the most remarkable ways plants sense their environment: chemical detection. Plants are constantly sampling the air and the soil for chemical cues. Small amounts of volatile organic compounds are released, molecules that float in the air and have their own receptors that detect them. When one plant is attacked by herbivore, it often releases a cloud of warning chemicals into the air. Nearby plants, upon detecting these signals, begin to ramp up their own defenses by producing bitter compounds, thickening their leaves, or even summoning predatory insects that feed on the attackers. There's a kind of chemical gossip. Danger. Aphids at table 2. This kind of listening in can occur between plants of the same species or between entirely different species. Some plants are even selective in their selection of listeners. Studies have shown that sagebrush plants are more likely to respond to chemical signals from people who are genetically related to you rather than strangers. Others, like tobacco plants, seem to respond more successfully than foreign chemical language dialects to local ones. And these responses aren't just defensive. Some plants can detect the presence of neighboring plants before they touch or shade each other simply by detecting the chemicals released by nearby roots. They might then alter their own root architecture, adjust their growth direction, or change how they allocate resources between stems and leaves. It's a subtle but strategic form of communication, like courteously removing oneself from the situation before another person reaches for the same cup of tea. Gravity is another cue that plants are constantly monitoring. This is known as gravitropism. Roots typically grow upward, aided by gravity, whereas shoots grow downward. Inside the plant cells are tiny structures called statoliths, little starch-filled organelles that settle in response to gravity, providing a directional light. If you tilt a potted plant on its side, it won't stay that way for long. Within hours or days, the orientation of the stem will be corrected as it recurves upward. Some plants use this ability in quite creative ways. For example, certain seeds that fall to the ground in awkward positions can reorient themselves as they sprout. They feel which way is down and adjust their early growth to ensure that roots go underground and shoots head skyward. It's all part of their instinctive programming, shaped by millions of years of trial and error. Plants also sense moisture with great precision. Roots can grow toward areas of higher water concentration, a behavior known as hydropism. This makes perfect sense. A root that can find water is a root that keeps the plant alive. But what's astonishing is how accurately roots can detect tiny gradients in moisture, sometimes just a few percent different from one side of a root tip to another. They're like living, divining rods, tuning in to the subtle whispers of damp soil. Even temperature does not go unnoticed by the plant. Many plants require a period of cold before they will flower, a process known as virilization. It's nature's way of ensuring that flowering doesn't happen too early when frost might still be a threat. Some seeds also use temperature cues to determine when to germinate. Others rely on a combination of temperature, moisture, and light to break dormancy, ensuring that they sprout only when conditions are just right. Altogether, this suite of senses gives plants a remarkably detailed picture of their environment. They may not see with eyes, or hear with ears, or sniff with noses, but they sense the world with a quiet, distributed intelligence that rivals many animals in sensitivity and nuance. It's not the kind of perception that leads to emotion or memory as we know it, but it is an awareness, say, constant, mute observation of the world that informs each tendril's twitch, every curl of a root, every unfurling of a leaf. So the next time you walk past a row of trees or tend to your houseplants, know this. They're aware of this. They're paying attention to the light, the air, the touch of the wind, the moisture in the soil, and maybe even the subtle sound of your footsteps. They exist, rooted in place, but not disconnected. They are still, but not silent. And they are listening always in their own green and patient way. There's something magical about watching sunlight spill through leaves on a quiet morning. Like the world, it has a serene, timeless quality, is recharging quietly. And in a way it is. Every beam of sunlight that lands on a leaf is more than just light. It's energy, pure and potent, ready to be transformed. The alchemy that plants perform with. This sunlight is one of the most elegant and essential processes on Earth. It's called photosynthesis. In addition, it is the reason why donuts, whales, hummingbirds, hedgehogs, and myself are all here. At its core, photosynthesis is how plants turn light energy into chemical energy. They take sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide, and use them to create glucose, a sugar molecule that powers just about everything they do. They do this by releasing oxygen, which is amazing, generous of them, and rather fortunate for the rest of us. Let's look at how this happens. The main actors in this solar power drama are the chloroplasts, tiny green organelles inside plant cells. These chloroplasts are filled with chlorophyll, the pigment that gives plants their green color, and the molecule responsible for capturing light energy. Chlorophyll is incredibly good at absorbing the red and blue parts of the light spectrum while mostly reflecting green light, which is why we see green in plants. Now, chloroplasts don't just absorb sunlight for fun. Electrons within them are excited when chlorophyll captures light energy. Molecule giving them enough energy to hop onto a chain of proteins known as the electron transport chain. Think of it as a tiny high-speed assembly line inside each chloroplast buzzing with charged particles and clever chemical tricks. Photosynthesis goes through two main stages. The first is the light-dependent reactions, which, as the name suggests, require light. These reactions take place in the phylloloid membranes of the chloroplast, which are like little stacks of green pancakes. When chlorophyll absorbs sunlight, it uses that energy to split water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. The oxygen is released as a byproduct, floating up through the leaf, and eventually out into the air, where it becomes part of your next deep breath. The hydrogen, meanwhile, sticks around in the form of high-energy molecules like ADP and NADPH, which are sort of like the plant's rechargeable batteries. The second stage is called the Calvin cycle, or the light-independent reactions. Despite the name, these don't necessarily happen in the dark. They just don't need light to proceed directly. This stage of the process occurs in the stroma, the fluid fill space around the phylloloid stacks. Here, the plant uses carbon dioxide from the air and the energy from its little ADP and NADPH batteries to build glucose molecules. Additionally, glucose is where the real magic lies. Glucose is the starting point for just about everything the plant needs. It can be used right away for energy, stored for later in the form of starch, or turned into cellulose to build cell walls. It's like a universal building block made from sunshine and air. This process, pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and the basis of nearly every food chain on Earth, is its transformation into energy-rich sugars. Herbivores eat the plants, carnivores eat the herbivores, and everything ultimately depends on that quiet chloroplast-powered miracle happening inside a leaf. Now, as straightforward as photosynthesis appears to be, it's also astonishingly efficient and complex. A single large tree might have hundreds of thousands of leaves, each one covered in millions of chloroplasts, each chloroplast packed with stacks of phylloids. It's a solar farm on a microscopic scale, humming away without wires, screens, or the need for a plug. But plants aren't just passive solar panels. They adjust their photosynthesis depending on conditions. Bright and light, they ramp up production. In shade, they slow down. In dry conditions, they might close their stomata, the tiny pores on their leaves, to conserve water, even if that means reducing the intake of carbon dioxide and lowering their photosynthetic output. Gaining energy and losing water are always in balance. Some plants, particularly those in hot and arid environments, have evolved clever variations of the standard photosynthetic process. Most plants follow a method called C3 photosynthesis, which gets its name from the first 3-carbon compound it makes. However, in hotter regions, C3 photosynthesis may become ineffective in environments with low temperatures and a lack of water. The enzyme responsible for grabbing carbon dioxide, called rubiscoco, gets a bit confused in high temperatures and starts picking up oxygen instead, which wastes energy. To solve this problem, some plants have developed a different approach called C4 photosynthesis. These plants, which include corn and sugarcane, physically separate the stages of carbon fixation and sugar production into different types of cells. This allows them to concentrate carbon dioxide where it's needed and minimize the wasteful side reactions. It's similar to organizing your kitchen so that the prep and cooking areas are in different rooms. Inefficient in your home, perhaps, but incredibly effective for controlling humidity and heat. And then there are canned plants like cacti and pineapples. These plants only open their stomata at night when the air is cooler and more humid. They take in carbon dioxide and keep it in a special container until the sun comes out, at which point they resume photosynthesis while keeping their stomata were tightly shut. It's a brilliant strategy for saving water while still getting the job done. And succulents are so adept at surviving in harsh, dry environments because of this. Photosynthesis doesn't just support plants. It shapes the entire planet. It has altered Earth's atmosphere over a few billion years. Early Earth had almost no oxygen. It was the rise of photosynthetic organisms, particularly cyanobacteria, that began pumping oxygen into the air. This led to what scientists call the Great Oxygenation Event around 2 billion years ago, which drastically changed the planet's chemistry and made aerobic life, including us, possible. In a very real sense, the oxygen in every breath you take is a gift from photosynthesis. And not just from plants. Algae and photosynthetic plankton in the oceans play a massive role too. Tiny as they are, these aquatic organisms produce roughly half of the oxygen in Earth's atmosphere. That's right. Every other breath you take comes from the sea. Photosynthesis also plays a crucial role in climate regulation. By pulling carbon dioxide from the air, plants help reduce greenhouse gases and moderate global temperatures. Forests, wetlands, and grasslands act as carbon sinks, locking away carbon in their biomass and in the soil. When we cut down forests or burn fossil fuels, we release that stored carbon back into the atmosphere, tipping the balance. As a result, photosynthesis has become a hot topic, and literally in climate science. Understanding how plants respond to increased carbon dioxide, rising temperatures, and shifting rainfall patterns is essential for predicting how ecosystems will change in the future. It's also why planting trees and protecting natural habitats has become such an important strategy in efforts to combat climate change. But beyond the science and the numbers, there's something deeply beautiful about photosynthesis. It's a quiet, constant miracle. The leaf does not exaggerate. The tree doesn't brag, but moment by moment, day by day, plants are capturing sunlight, producing sugar, exhaling oxygen, and keeping the show running in its entirety. Even in urban environments, on balconies, in parks, and in rooftop gardens, photosynthesis is quietly at work. In cracks in the pavement where weeds take root and reach for the light. Every patch of green is a tiny solar engine humming along, keeping the planet habitable and the air fresh. And possibly most poetic of all is the idea that sunlight, which we can't eat or drink or breathe, is transformed by plants into something that we could use. They catch what we cannot hold and turn it into fuel for life. Oxygen in your lungs, glucose in an apple, and starch in a potato are all produced by the silent, invisible labor of leaves. So the next time you sit in a patch of dappled sunlight, or notice the way a tree gently sways in the breeze, take a moment to thank the humble chloroplast. It's a tiny factory that never clocks out, a solar-powered chemist that makes life possible one photon at a time. Photosynthesis is not simply a procedure. It's a promise, a guarantee that something vital and vibrant is present even in stillness and silence. Always working, the leaves know how to turn light into life. Additionally, they have been doing so for more than 3 billion years. Not a bad track record for something that we typically ignore out of habit. Imagine being a plant. You can't run. You can't hide. And your day job involves standing in one place while all sorts of things nibble, bump, or shade you. And yet somehow you survive. Not only that, you thrive. One of the ways plants manage this is through a kind of slow motion behavior that, while almost imperceptible to us in real time, reveals a world of movement, strategy, and even communication when sped up. This is the drama of growth, of bending, reaching, curling, and unfurling. And it's all powered by something deceptively simple: plant hormones. Just like animals use hormones to regulate growth, development, and behavior, plants rely on their own internal chemical messengers. Plants can use these substances to light, gravity, touch, injury, competition, and countless other environmental signals. But instead of circulating through a bloodstream, plant hormones move through SSAP, cell membranes, and the spaces between cells. Changing as they go along, one of the most famous plant hormones is auxin. If plant hormones were a pop band, Oxen would be the lead singer, the one with the big hair and the spotlight. Auxin is particularly important in phototropism, which is the process by which growth is coordinated. Tendency of plants to grow toward light. You've probably seen this in action when a house plant leans dramatically toward a window, as though trying to get out of the living room completely. Here's how it works. Auxin is produced in the tips of growing shoots. When light shines on one side of the plant, auxin redistributes itself to the shaded side. This imbalance causes the cells on the darker side to elongate more than those on the light side, making the plant bend toward the light source. It's a subtle adjustment, but over time it adds up to a very deliberate. Also helps guide root growth. Roots respond to gravity by growing downward, a behavior called gravitropism. When a plant is tilted, or auxin again, shifts to one side, in this case the lower side of the root. However, auxin here produces the opposite result. Instead of promoting cell elongation, it slows it down. This causes the upper side of the root to grow more quickly than the lower side, bending the root back toward the downward direction. It's a wonderfully simple trick using the same molecule to do opposite things, depending on the tissue. Auxin is involved as a multitasker, not just in bending, but in root formation, leaf arrangement, fruit development, and even wound healing. But oxygen doesn't just work. Plants have a whole cast of hormonal characters. One of them is gibberellin, which sounds like a character from a fantasy novel, but is in fact a powerful growth promoter. Gibberellins aid in the elongation of stems, break the dormancy of seeds, and initiate flowering. Gibberellin are the contractors who push the design upward and outward if auxin are the plant's architect. Then, there are cytokinins, which promote cell division. These hormones work in tandem with auxin, but they often play a counterbalancing role. While auxin encourages root growth, cytokinins encourage shoot growth. The ratio between the two can determine whether a plant puts more energy into growing up or digging down. In a way, it's like internal budgeting. This season, should we construct more roots or more leaves? The answer depends on the plant's needs and the setting in which it is growing. Oxalic acid is a major player as well. Despite its name, which suggests that it is to blame for abscission or leaf drop, this hormone is more like the emergency brake at the plant. It aids the plant in coping with stress, especially drought. When water is scarce, oxalic acid signals the stomata, those tiny pores on the leaf surface, to close, reducing water loss through evaporation. It also helps seeds stay dormant during unfavorable conditions, delaying germination until the odds of survival improve. Then there's ethylene, a gaseous hormone that acts like the plant's internal clock and social cue. Ethylene helps regulate processes like fruit ripening, flower wilting, and leaf fall. If you've ever left a banana near other fruit and noticed that everything ripens faster, that's ethylene at work. Bananas release ethylene gas, which triggers ripening in nearby produce. It's such a powerful effect that commercial growers often use controlled ethylene exposure to ripen fruit in warehouses before it hits the shelves. Additionally, ethylene is involved in how plants respond to mechanical stress. When a seedling pushes through the soil and hits resistance, it releases ethylene to alter its pattern of growth. Instead of growing tall and slender, which could lead to breakage, it thickens its stem and slows its upward growth, giving it a sturdier build. It's like hitting the gym for some strength training before heading out into the world. These hormones have no effect in isolation. They're in constant dialogue, modulating and balancing each other's effects determined by the plant's internal requirements and external conditions. It's not a top-down command system, but a fluid, decentralized coordination of signals, more like a jazz band improvising together than a military parade. The numerous graceful movements that are associated with plants are the result of all of this hormonal chatter. The method by sunflower turns its face toward the morning sun. The way a vine sends out a searching tendril and curls around a fence post. The way leaves droop in the heat of the day and perk up again by evening. These movements, known Collectively, because nastic responses and tropisms are slow, subtle, and largely driven by changes in cell growth and water pressure. In phototropism and gravitropism, as we've seen, the plant grows toward or away from a stimulus. But in nastic movements, the response is independent of the direction of the stimulus. The delicate plant Mimosa potica, for instance, folds its leaves inward when touched. This isn't a directional growth response. It's a quick Tura movement caused by rapid shifts in water pressure in specialized cells at the base of the leaflets. The result is dramatic and oddly charming, like a bashful leaf pulling a curtain. Some flowers also exhibit nastic movements. Morning glories unfurl in the early light, while others close their petals at dusk. These opening and closing behaviors are often regulated by circadian rhythms, light cues, and temperature, all tied to the plant's internal clock and hormonal state. Even seed germination is a carefully orchestrated performance. When a seed senses the right combination of moisture, temperature, and sometimes light, it begins to awaken. Hormones, similar to the tug-of-war that gibberellin and abscisic acid engage in, deciding whether the seed should remain dormant or break through its coat, and it will begin to grow. Enzymes are activated when gibberellin wins the match, that allow the embryonic root to emerge and seek by softening the seed coat and mobilizing stored food reserves. Soil. As the seedling grows, its tiny root and shoot tips begin their own hormonal negotiations, adjusting their paths in response to the environment. Roots grow toward moisture and nutrients. Shoots reach for light. The entire apparatus of photosynthesis is activated as leaves expand and chloroplasts fire up. Comes online. It's the quiet birth of a new green life, choreographed entirely by chemical whispers. And if you think all this growth is mindless or automatic, consider the incredible precision with which plants adjust to changing conditions. A tree growing on the windward side of a hillside with wind will develop thicker bark and stronger branches. A plant shaded by a taller neighbor might use its energy to grow laterally, breaking through the canopy. Even the angle of a leaf can change slightly throughout the day to maximize light capture and minimize water loss. These aren't random changes. They're fine-tuned responses guided by hormones and carried out with incredible elegance. Time-lapse photography has helped us see these movements more clearly. Speed up a plant's life, and it becomes a dancer bending toward the sun, new leaves sprouting, vines twirling, and even swaying in response to unseen signals. It's a reminder that just because something moves slowly doesn't mean it's not moving at all. Plants are in constant motion, just on their own terms. And perhaps that's the most beautiful part. In a world that prizes speed, plants invite us to slow down, to notice the curve of a stem, the patience of a bud waiting to bloom, the way a leaf catches the light. Their development is both a kind of science and silent poetry written in hormones and cells that unfolds in the stillness. Therefore, the next time you water your favorite houseplant or pass a tree, take a moment to appreciate the invisible orchestration at play. Every turn of a vine, every move in the direction of the sun, every curling petal or drooping leaf is the result of a careful, hormone-driven conversation happening just beneath the surface. It's the intricate dance of life itself. Slow, steady, and utterly extraordinary. Plants may not have cell phones or the internet, but that hasn't stopped them from improving their communication skills. In point of fact, plants have been messages for hundreds of millions of years, quietly, efficiently, and often, without anyone being aware. Their methods are subtle, but surprisingly complex, involving an arsenal of chemical compounds, a flair for timing, and even a little bit of deliberate deception. It's communication all the way around, not gossip in the traditional sense. Same. Warning signals, distress calls, recruitment posters for insect allies, and occasionally some sneaky manipulation of a local wildlife. Let's start with one of the clearest examples of plant communication: chemical warnings. When a plant is under Attack, say by a hungry caterpillar, it doesn't just suffer in silence. It responds by releasing volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, into the air. These are tiny airborne chemicals that drift out from the injured leaves and spread through the surrounding area. To us, they might carry a faint, grassy smell or the scent of freshly broken greenery. But to other plants nearby, they're the equivalent of an emergency broadcast system. Plants that are nearby, upon detecting these VOCs, begin to ramp up their own defenses. They might produce compounds that are poisonous or bitter that make them unappetizing to herbivores, or thicken their leaves to increase chewing difficult. This response can happen within minutes of receiving the signal. It's not magic. It's biochemistry, and it works remarkably well. One classic example comes from wild tobacco plants. When a tobacco plant is attacked by caterpillars, it releases a specific blend of VOCs that not only warns nearby tobacco plants, but also attracts predatory insects like parasitic wasps. These wasps are natural enemies of the caterpillars, and they follow the chemical trail straight to the buffet. The plant, in effect, has called in air support. But here's where things get even more interesting. The chemical messages plants send are often highly specific. A tobacco plant being eaten by caterpillars will produce a different chemical signal than one attacked by beetles. Some plants can even distinguish between mechanical damage, like a broken leaf, and biological attack. Simply snipping a leaf with scissors won't trigger the same chemical cascade as actual herbivory, because the enzymes in insect saliva are part of what triggers the plant's alarm system. In other words, plants can tell the difference between an accident and an attack. There's also evidence that these warning signals aren't just one-way broadcasts. They're part of a larger discussion. Some plants seem to respond more strongly to distress signals from close relatives than from unrelated neighbors. Others may choose not to respond at all if the perceived threat is minimal. It's a system with nuance, not just a one-size-fits-all panic button. This kind of airborne signaling is called plant-to-L communication, and it's been observed in many species from corn and beans to maple and sagebrush trees. But communication doesn't stop at the air. Roots can send chemical messages through the soil, often using fungal networks as conduits. This below-ground signaling allows plants to coordinate responses over greater distances and keep social ties with neighbors, similar to a root-level social media platform. Plants, according to some researchers, may even be capable of priming each other. In other words, a plant that has been exposed to stress, like drought or pest attack, may send out signals that prepare nearby plants for the same conditions, making them more resilient. When the pressure eventually builds up, it's like receiving an umbrella just as the rain starts to fall. Communication isn't always about danger, though. Chemical cues are also used by plants to attract allies. One of the best-known examples is in the realm of pollination. Flowers are essentially botanical billboards advertising themselves to pollinators with bright colors, alluring shapes, and irresistible scents. The chemicals involved in floral scent are incredibly diverse. Countless varieties of volatile compounds that not only by species, but also by time of day, bloom stage, and even weather. In order to attract nocturnal pollinators like moths, many flowers release more scent at night. Others lose their scent to bees and butterflies' busiest times. After pollination, some even alter their scent to signal potential visitors know the buffet is closed. It is a remarkably efficient system. Chemical advertising with real-time updates. But plants can go a step further. Some flowers don't just attract insects, they manipulate them. The orchid family, for instance, include a number of species that use chemical mimicry to lure pollinators. One of the most famous examples is the bee orchid, which produces a flower that looks and smells like a female bee. Male bees, tricked by this botanical impersonation, attempt to mate with the flower, a behavior charmingly known as pseudo. In the process, they pick up pollen and carry it to the next deceiving bloom. It does the job, even though it is not very fair to the bee. Some plants even recruit from other species by bringing in guards. When attacked by herbivores, certain species release vox that draw insects that eat other insects. Not just parasitic wasps, but also ladybugs, lace wings, or predatory mites. These allies then feed on the attackers, offering the plant a natural pest control method. It's like outsourcing your security system to the local insect population. Of course, not all plant communication is quite so altruistic. Chemical warfare is used by some plants to harm their neighbors. This is known as allelopathy, and it involves releasing compounds into the air or soil that inhibit the growth of competing plants. Black walnut trees are infamous for this. Juglone, a compound produced by their roots, is toxic to many other plant species. By chemically sterilizing the soil around them, walnut trees reduce competition and carve out a little extra breathing room. Even crop plants are able to participate. Chemicals that prevent germination are produced, for instance, by wheat and rice, of nearby weed seeds. It's a sort of botanical turf war, and it plays out silently every day in backyards, forests, and fields all over the world. Additionally, plants may eavesdrop on their neighbors. A plant that detects vox from a wounded neighbor might start boosting its own defenses even if it hasn't been attacked yet. This kind of anticipatory behavior can be extremely advantageous in dense plant communities where one plant's fate frequently predicts that of many. It's a little like deciding to check the weather forecast after observing your neighbor installing storm shutters. Chemical interaction is so popular and effective that researchers have begun investigating its application in agriculture. By mimicking the warning signals plants naturally produce, it may be possible to create treatments that help crops defend themselves without the need for synthetic pesticides. Imagine spraying a field not with chemicals to kill insects, but with a scent that tells the plants, get ready, something's coming. Also, there are efforts to breed or engineer crops that are better at attracting beneficial insects through scent. By enhancing with these natural channels of communication, we might be able to develop productive agricultural systems that are healthier and more durable, with nature as opposed to against it. Even the timing of these chemical messages is important. Plants are incredibly sensitive to circadian rhythms, and their communication patterns often follow a daily schedule. Some defenses are stronger in the morning when herbivores are most active. Some floral scents peak in the late afternoon, aligning with pollinator visits. Others ramp up at night, calling in nocturnal allies or preparing for cooler temperatures. In this way, plants don't just talk. They listen. They react to cues from the environment, from each other, and from the many insects, microbes, and animals that share their world. It does not constitute human communication. There are no thoughts or feelings involved, but it is remarkably sophisticated, and perhaps most impressively, it's been going on for eons. Long before humans developed language, long before birds sang or wolves howled, plants were talking. They were sending signals, adjusting their chemistry, recruiting allies, and sometimes sabotaging their rivals. The forest was alive with messages. We just didn't know how to hear them. With the assistance of modern science, we are beginning to tune in. We're learning to decipher the language of leaves, to understand what plants are saying with their scents, their roots, their invisible emissions and blooms. It's a quiet conversation, but one that shapes ecosystems, supports biodiversity, and, quite frankly, keeps the planet running. Therefore, the next time you enter a garden or pass a flowering bush, take a moment to appreciate the chemical conversations happening all around you. There may be no shouting or singing, but the plants are whispering of danger, of allies, of opportunities and threats. And in their own slow, fragrant chemical way, they are always speaking. Plants may be rooted in place, but that doesn't mean they're helpless. In fact, when it comes to self-defense, they've got a surprisingly sophisticated playbook. Imagine being constantly surrounded by hungry mouths, from insects and snails to goats and giraffes. And yet, you can't run, can't swat, can't even scream. What can a leafy organism do? As it turns out, quite a lot. Over millions of years, plants have evolved an impressive suite of defense strategies, some physical, some chemical, and a few downright sneaky. These methods aid them ward off predators, deter grazers, and even manipulate other species into doing their dirty work. A plant's still life is more like a slow motion battlefield than most of us ever realize. Let's start with the most visible line of defense: physical structures. Many plants come equipped with built-in armor. Think of thorns, spines, and prickles, the botanical equivalent of barbed wire. For instance, roses have prickles, which are pointed protrusions from the epidermis. The spines of cacti, which are actually modified leaves, are what make them famous. And hawthorns and blackberries come armed with long, rigid thorns, which are modified branches. Animals are discouraged from biting or coming too close by these sharp features. They aren't perfect. Some animals adapt and eat around them, but they certainly make grazing a bit less appealing. However, there are subtler, gentler defenses as well. Many plants have a layer of fine hairs on their leaves or stems known as trichomes. These tiny projections can make the surface feel unpleasantly fuzzy, irritating, or even sticky to insects. In some species like stinging nettles, trichomes act like hypodermic needles, injecting irritants when touched. One gentle brush against the nettles. Leaves can leave you tingling, itching, or cursing softly under your breath. Still, plants don't stop at the surface. Many of their most powerful defenses are invisible until you taste them, or try to. Plants produce an astonishing variety of chemical compounds specifically designed to deter herbivores. Some are bitter, some are toxic, and some mess with digestion in particularly unpleasant ways. Alkaloids are one such group. These are nitrogen-containing compounds that include some of the most familiar names in plant chemistry: caffeine, nicotine, morphine, and quinine. While humans have found all sorts of interesting uses for them, medicinal, plants primarily use them to make themselves unappetizing or even dangerous for recreational or other purposes. They would graze. Caffeine, for example, doesn't just wake up your brain. It's also toxic to many insects in high enough concentrations. In a similar vein, nicotine is a potent neurotoxin that deters insect herbivores from feasting on tobacco leaves. Then, there are tannins, which you might know from tea or red wine. These compounds bind to proteins and make them harder to digest. In the plant world, that means a mouthful of leaves laced with tannins becomes a lot less nutritious and a lot more annoying for the animal chewing them. It's a gentle, persistent deterrent, the plant version of leaving sand in the sandwiches. Other defenses are more direct. For instance, cyanogenic glycoids release hydrogen cyanide when the plant tissue is damaged. This can be fatal to insects and even to larger animals if they eat enough. Some types of clover. These compounds are present in trace amounts in cassava and even apple seeds. Proper preparation or cooking breaks them down. In edible plants, but in the wild they act as a potent do not eat sign. And then we have glucosinolates, sulfur-containing compounds found in members of the mustard family like cabbage, horseradish, and broccoli. These create a pungent, spicy taste when the plant is chewed. To a rabbit, that hot zing might be a reason to reconsider dinner. To us, it's a condiment. Interestingly, many of the plant chemicals we now enjoy, whether as flavors, fragrances, or medicine, started off as defense mechanisms. Plants never intended to make our salads more exciting or our spice racks more colorful. They were simply trying to avoid becoming lunch. But defense in the plant kingdom isn't always about making things unpleasant. Sometimes it's about recruiting reinforcements. Plants can and do enlist help in their battles against pests, and their allies are often members of the insect world. Certain plants release volatile organic compounds when threatened, which bring in insect predators. Corn, cotton, and lima beans, for instance, emit specific scents when caterpillars begin chewing on their leaves. Parasitic wasps that lay their eggs are sparked by these scents, which function as a chemical distress signal. inside the caterpillars. The unsuspecting herbivores are then killed by the wasp larvae as it grows inside them. It's a gruesome but effective way for plants to fight back. Allow nature's own savagery to resolve the issue. This isn't a rare phenomenon. More than 100 plant species across multiple families have been documented calling for backup. In this way, the relationship is so finely tuned that some plants can vary the chemical blend they release depending on the type of attacker. Chewing insects, piercing insects, and even mechanical damage results in a variety of responses. It is not simply an ordinary alarm. It's a customized plea for very specific assistance. Some plants go even further by forming relationships that last longer. For instance, acacia trees have a famously close relationship with certain species of ants. Ants can nest in the hollow thorns made by the trees, eat nectar-rich bodies made just for them as well as live. In exchange, the ants patrol the branches and attack any plants or herbivores that approach too closely. It's a traditional room and board for security arrangement, and it benefits both parties. The ants get plenty of food and a safe place to live. The tree gets a built-in defense force complete with jaws and stingers. In a few cases, these ant relationships become so exclusive that the ants won't leave their host tree even when offered other food sources. It's not just cooperation, it's coevolution. Each species has shaped the other over time, resulting in a tightly woven partnership that goes far beyond casual mutualism. But not all defenses are about chemical warfare or armed guards. Some plants rely on good old-fashioned trickery. A number of species use mimicry to avoid being eaten. One of the cleverest examples is the passion flower vine, which produces little yellowish spots on its leaves that look like butterfly eggs. Since butterflies tend to avoid laying eggs on leaves that already appear occupied, partly to avoid competition and partly to escape predators, this simple visual. The plants need to deal with caterpillars can be reduced by deception. It's a botanical version of nothing to. See this? In a way, other plants act dead. When touched, they wilt or droop, making themselves look less appealing. Mimosa pudica, a delicate plant, is a well-known example, folding its leaves inward when disturbed. Grazers may be discouraged or shaken by this sudden collapse off of small insects, and the plant immediately perks back up after a brief recovery period. Some plants also engage in what might be called community defense. Certain species of trees have been observed to synchronize their seed production in a phenomenon known as masting. In masters, the trees produce an overwhelming number of seeds all at once. This sudden abundance saturates the local environment with food, making it impossible for seed predators to eat them all. As a result, a higher percentage of seeds survive and germinate. In the years between mast events, the trees produce very few seeds, keeping predator populations low. It's a long-term, coordinated defense strategy on the scale of entire forests. And while many of these defenses are triggered by specific threats, some plants maintain a low-level readiness at all times. This is known as constitutive defense. It has characteristics like tough leaves, thorns, and a baseline level of toxic compounds. Other defenses are induced. They only kick in when the plant senses stress or damage. Induced defenses save energy, but constitutive defenses offer constant protection. Most plants use a combination of both, adjusting their strategy depending on their lifestyle and environment. There's a cost to all this, of course. Producing toxins, building armor, and signaling for help all require energy and resources that could otherwise go toward growth or reproduction. Plants have to make trade-offs. If conditions are good and predators are few, it might make sense to invest in leaves and flowers. But in rough neighborhoods full of nibblers, defense takes priority. Some plants even keep a sort of biochemical memory of past attacks, allowing them to respond more quickly if the same threat returns. It's not memory in the way humans understand it. It is a physiological response, but there are no mental snapshots or emotional responses. Preparedness, a learned response encoded in the plant's molecular pathways. So, even though a plant may appear to be doing nothing, it actually engages in strategic decision-making on a regular basis. Moment. Should I toughen my leaves? Should I call for wasps? Should I invest in another flower or hold off until this beetle situation is under control? Plants may not have mouths to bite back, but that hasn't stopped them from becoming masters of survival. Their defenses are varied, adaptable, and often beautifully subtle. Whether through chemical deterrence, alliances with insects, armor, or trickery, they find ways to endure in a world full of hungry mouths. Next time you take a walk in the garden or through the woods, keep the quiet warriors around you in your thoughts. The story is told by every sharp taste, curled leaf, and pungent scent. A story not of passivity, but of resilience. Because in the plant world, silence is not the same as being still. It just means fighting smart. Pollination is one of those natural processes that sound like background noise. Important, sure, but easy to overlook. Yet, without pollination, life as we know it would stumble to a halt. The apple in your fruit bowl, the vanilla in your ice cream, the chocolate in your cupboard, and the coffee in your morning mug all exist because of this ancient exchange between plants and pollinators. But pollination isn't just biology. It is a parade, a pageant, and courtship, a delicate, dazzling dance between flower and visitor with petals. As the prize, nectar, and stage curtains. At the heart of this drama is a simple need. Despite their independence, plants still require some assistance from the outside for reproduction. They require their pollen, which is the powdery packets of male genetic material intended to reach the flower stigma, which is receptive. 4. This is dealt with brutally for wind-pollinated plants like grasses and some trees. Force. They produce enormous clouds of pollen and let the wind scatter it like biological confetti. It's not particularly elegant and not terribly precise, but it works well enough for their purposes. It also explains why allergy season exists. But for flowering plants that rely on animals to do the job, the strategy becomes far more refined. These are the plants that have evolved to attract, feed, and guide pollinators. Beetles, butterflies, birds, bats, and other insects, and even the occasional lizard. Each flower becomes a carefully designed invitation. Come closer, take a sip, and, if you wouldn't mind brushing up against this bit of pollen while you're at it. The numerous methods of pollination are staggering. Take bees, for example. It's possible that these little visitors are the world's most important pollinators. Many flowers have evolved specifically to attract bees, offering up sweet nectar in exchange for a little pollen relocation. Bee-pollinated flowers are usually brightly colored, especially in shades of blue and violet, which bees see well and often have a sweet fragrance. They tend to be open and accessible, allowing bees to land easily and navigate with their legs and proboscis. Some flowers go even further, adding visual cues like ultraviolet nectar guides, patterns on the petals that are invisible to humans, but visible to bees as landing lights. These patterns help direct the insect all the way to the center of the flower, where the parts needed for reproduction are waiting. It's clever marketing adapted for compound eyes. Butterflies, on the other hand, prefer a different layout because they have long, slender proboscises and tend to gently land. The bright reds, oranges, and pinks of butterflies' favorite flowers are typically found in tubular arrangements. Pinks. Since butterflies rely more on sight than smell, they typically lack strong scents, and they frequently provide landing platforms where the insect can perch and feed at leisure. Then there are moths, which tend to do their pollinating at night. Moth-pollinated flowers are typically pale or white, standing out in the moonlight, and they often emit strong, sweet fragrances to guide their visitors through the dark. Jasmine, yucca, and evening primrose are all pollinated by moths, and their blooms open just in time for twilights. First fluttering guests. Birds, particularly hummingbirds, also get in on the act. Flowers adapted for bird pollination are often vivid red or orange with long tubular shapes that match the bird's beaks. These flowers usually produce copious amounts of nectar, but little or no scent. Despite their excellent vision, birds' poor sense of smell. Hummingbirds hover like feathered helicopters, sipping while inadvertently dusting their faces with pollen. It's pollination with a bit of aerial acrobatics. Bats, too, play a vital role, especially in tropical regions. But pollinated flowers tend to be large, sturdy, and nocturnal. They often hang down to accommodate the bat's flight patterns and are filled with sweet musky nectar. Some even emit odors, faintly reminiscent of fermented fruit, which bats find appealing. While sipping or slurping from the flowers, bats get coated in pollen, which they carry with them to the next bloom. If you've ever eaten a banana, mango, or guava, a bat might be to blame. And then there are the beetles, often overlooked and not exactly graceful. Beetles are among the earliest pollinators in evolutionary history. Flowers that rely on beetles typically provide a sturdy platform by being tough, open, and shaped like bowls for guests who are clumsy. Additionally, they frequently emit unpleasant, spicy, or even strong odor because beetles enjoy a little funk when they visit flowers. Magnolia 1. Beetle-pollinated flowers are a prime example of the oldest flowering plant lineages. Even though most of these pollination relationships are mutualistic, both the plant and the pollinator benefit. There are also some shady transactions in the floral industry. Some plants do wrong. A few orchids, because for instance, make flowers that look like and even smell like female insects. Male insects tricked into. They attempted to mate with the flower, thinking they had found a mate. They collect, or during the awkward encounter, release pollen. It's a floral con job, and it works remarkably well. Other flowers promise nectar, but do not provide it. They trick pollinators into visiting just once, often enough to transfer pollen before the visitor learns better and moves on. The same if enough naive pollinators pass through. Deception can work. In some cases, the relationship develops to the point where it's so particular that the plant and the pollinator are totally dependent on one another. The classic example is the yucca plant and the yucca moth. The female moth collects pollen from one flower with intent, then flies to another, where she not only deposits the pollen, but also lays her eggs in the ovary. The plant is pollinated and the moth larvae eat a few of the seeds that are growing, but not all of them, just enough to feed the next generation without destroying the plant's ability to reproduce. It's a beautifully balanced arrangement evolved through countless generations of delicate give and take. In fig trees, the relationship is even stranger. Each species of fig has its own specialized fig wasp that can navigate the complex interior of the fig's inverted flower. The wasp lays its eggs inside, pollinating the fig in the process. The larvae develops safely within, and when the time is right, new adult wasps emerge and fly off to find another fig. It's not exactly romantic, but works. Pollination is also big business in human agriculture. Many crops depend heavily on managed pollinators, especially honeybees. In fact, entire industries have sprung up around transporting hives across regions to pollinate crops in bloom. Almond orchards in California, for instance, require billions of bees each year, brought in by the truckload just for the flowering period. It's a remarkable logistical operation, and it underscores how essential pollination is to the supply of our food. But there are challenges, too. Habitat loss, pesticide use, climate change, and disease have all taken a toll on pollinator populations worldwide. Bees, in particular, have faced steep declines in recent decades, raising concerns about food security and ecosystem health. Bumblebees, solitary bees, butterflies, and other wild pollinators and moths are just as important as honeybees and are often more efficient at pollinating certain plants. Protecting them means preserving the habitats they rely on. Meadows, hedgerow, wildflower patches, and forests. Fortunately, awareness is growing. Gardeners, farmers, and city planners are increasingly working to create pollinator-friendly environments. Planting native flowers, reducing pesticide use and providing shelter for bees and butterflies can make a big difference. Even a small balcony garden can support a few pollinators. And those visits might be keeping someone's morning coffee or weekend peach cobbler on the menu. Pollination is not just a biological transaction. It's a celebration of connection. It's a reminder that even the most stationary organisms are deeply intertwined with the world around them. A flower opens a bee visits a seed is made. It's simple and sublime, ordinary and extraordinary, all at once. The next time you see a hummingbird or bee hovering over a daisy, darting between blooms, take a moment to appreciate the choreography. What appears to be a straightforward sip of nectar is actually an essential ecological act. Partnership, an ancient alliance that keeps our ecosystems humming, our gardens blooming, and our plates full. And perhaps most wonderfully, pollination is a story of generosity. The plant provides a present: nectar, scent, shelter. The visitor takes that gift and gives one in return. Movement, pollen, a bridge. Between blossoms, it's an exchange rooted not in competition, but in cooperation. And in a world that can sometimes feel loud and rushed, that quiet act of mutual benefit is worth noticing and celebrating. Nightfall may seem like a time when the plant world winds down and tucks itself in for a well-earned rest. However, darkness actually reveals an entire different side of botanical life. While animals might curl up in dens or head home to roost, plants don't retreat. They transform. The night brings shifts in temperature, humidity, light, and atmospheric conditions. And plants respond with a remarkable array of changes, actions, and, in some instances, brand new performances. What plants do in the dark is a fascinating blend of biochemistry, timing, and quiet adaptation. The idea that plants sleep is an appealing one. After all, we humans love the concept of everything curling up with a blanket and dozing off. And while plants don't sleep in the way animals do, there are no dreams of sunbeams or sugar plums involved. They do undergo significant changes at night, many of which are regulated by internal biological clocks, known as circadian rhythms. These rhythms are driven by genes and proteins that cycle over approximately 24 hours, even in the absence of external cues. In the case of plants, circadian rhythms help time all sorts of critical processes like when to open and close, stomata, when to grow and produce particular chemicals. One of the nidinasti are the most obvious nighttime behaviors that plants perform. This is the movement of leaves or petals in response to the onset of darkness. Many plants fold their leaves upward or inward at night, a behavior that has puzzled scientists and poets alike for centuries. You might see clover leaves collapse together like a hand in prayer, or legume leaves droop gently as the light fades. Some flowers like tulips and morning glories close their petals entirely, only to open them again with the morning sun. But why do plants bother with this nightly choreography? One theory is that it helps reduce water loss. Stomata, which are tiny openings, pores on the surface of leaves, open to allow gas exchange. CO2 is what comes out. In both water vapor and oxygen are lost. At night, when photosynthesis halts due to the lack of sunlight, these pores close to conserve water. Folding the leaves might help reduce surface exposure and slow down evaporation even further, particularly in dry or windy environments. Another possible reason is defense. By closing their petals or drooping their leaves, plants may protect their more delicate parts from nighttime herbivores or sudden temperature drops. In the tropics, where nighttime predators like beetles and moths are more active, some flowers close up entirely at dusk, discouraging unwanted visitors. Others might rely on nighttime pollinators and open only after dark, trade in protection for opportunity. This leads us to the Nocturnal Pollination Club, a lesser-known but no less important group of plants that do their business under the stars. While bees and butterflies rule the daytime, Many plants cater to creatures of the night. These include moths, bats, and even a few species of nocturnal beetles. Their flowers are often pale or white to stand out in low light, and they emit strong, sweet scents that can travel farther in the cooler, still air of evening. One of the most famous of these night bloomers is the moonflower, a vine that opens its large, luminous white blossoms just after sunset. The scent is rich and intoxicating, designed to attract moths from a distance. Similarly, the night blooming jasmine releases its perfume only after dusk, luring in nighttime pollinators, with a scent that seems to grow stronger the darker it gets. Some cacti also bloom at night, particularly in arid desert environments where daytime heat is intense. The monarch of the night cactus, Selenarius grandiflorus, is a showstopper. It is immense. White flowers only bloom once per year, and they only last for one night before fading away. Morning. It's a brief spectacle that requires careful timing and a luck to be there. The timing of these nighttime behaviors is closely regulated by the plant's internal clock. Even so, many plants will continue to open and close their flowers or fold their leaves if they are kept in constant darkness, to a 24-hour cycle. This indicates that the rhythm is endogenous. It comes from within, but external cues like light and temperature can also fine-tune these rhythms, which aid plants in remaining in sync with their surroundings. In addition to movement and pollination, many metabolic processes shift gears at night. Photosynthesis occurs during the day, is in control of the energy game. The production of glucose is fueled by sunlight, and oxygen is released as a byproduct. But at night, the photosynthetic machinery shuts down and plants rely on stored energy to maintain basic functions. This energy comes from the sugars created during the day. These sugars are either used immediately or stored as starch in structures like leaves and stems. As night falls, enzymes begin breaking down these starch reserves into usable sugars, which are then distributed throughout the plant. It's a bit like living off leftovers, efficient, planned, and critical for keeping the lights on when the sun is off duty. In fact, plants are surprisingly good at budgeting their energy. Studies have shown that some plants can calculate how much starch they have and adjust the rate at which it's consumed so that it lasts exactly until the dawn. Not too fast, not too slow, just enough to make it through the night without running out. It's a botanical version of rationing guided by internal timekeeping and careful accounting. This nightly routine of shifting from photosynthesis to respiration is vital for growth. Most of a plant's growth actually occurs at night, when energy and resources are directed toward elongating stems, expanding leaves, and building new tissues. During the day, energy is collected. It's empty at night. The plant almost appears to be a still builder, hammering away after dark, growing imperceptibly taller while the rest of the world sleeps. Additionally, temperature has a significant impact on this nighttime dance. In many climates, nights are cooler and more humid than days. Plants respond to these changes by adjusting their cellular functions. For instance, in addition to light, temperature and humidity also affect stomata's opening and closing. In a few species, stomata actually opens slightly at night to allow limited gas exchange, particularly in environments where water is abundant. However, in arid areas, many plants follow a special strategy known as CM photosynthesis, short for casuation acid metabolism. This adaptation allows them to open their stomata at night instead of during the day, reducing water loss while still taking in carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide is stored as an acid overnight and used for photosynthesis the following day. It's a clever word count. For tough conditions, and numerous succulents and cacti use it. Even the microbial life associated with plants changes at night. Soil microbes that help with nutrient exchange, root growth, or disease resistance may become more active in cooler, moistester nighttime conditions. The rhizosphere, the zone around the roots can become a lively microbial marketplace after sunset, with roots exuding sugars and microbes trading nutrients in return. It's like a quiet underground bazaar lit, not by lanterns, but by chemical signals. Meanwhile, back above ground, the reduction in light has another curious effect. It alters the colors of some plants, or at least how they appear. In moonlight or low light, green appears darker, while white and silver foliage can seem to glow. Some plants, like dusty miller or lamb's ear, have silvery leaves with fine hairs that catch and reflect the moonlight, making them especially striking in nighttime gardens. These adaptations may help protect against temperature fluctuations, or simply provide a bit of extra appeal to nocturnal pollinators. Even sound may play a role in the nighttime world of plants. While the idea of plants responding to sound is still being explored, some studies suggest that plants could detect vibrations and respond accordingly. This sensitivity could help them tune in to environmental cues, such as the swaying of nearby insects or shifts in wind direction. It's not hearing in the way we understand it, but it's one more way plants are tuned into their surroundings day and night. For many of us, the night is time of rest and recovery. For plants, it's time of rebalancing, recharging, and quiet industry. They show us that being rooted does not imply being rigid. The nighttime behaviors of plants reveal a side we don't often think about. A world of moonlight blossoms, sleepy leaves, and carefully rationed starch. So if you find yourself outside after dark, take a moment to look a bit closer. That vine might be reaching. That blossom might just be opening. And that quiet patch of greenery is far more awake than it seems. While we sleep, the plants are still there, growing, breathing, listening, and living out their own version of the night shift. Trees are the elder statesmen of the plant kingdom. Towering, ancient, and often slow to change, they exude an air of quiet wisdom. Trees are the old soul, whereas grasses are the busy commuters and shrubs are the gossiping neighbors, sitting calmly at the edge of the village, watching the world turn. But despite their stillness, trees are far from being alone or passive. In fact, many trees are deeply social creatures, connected, responsive, and surprisingly attuned to their neighbors. Some trees may even have some kind of memory, according to researchers, not in the conscious storytelling sense, but in the form of long-lasting physiological responses to past experiences. It's a slow motion form of remembering written in rings and branches and chemical cues. Let's begin with the roots, where the majority of a tree's social life takes place. In a healthy forest, the roots of neighboring trees often overlap and even fuse in places. Through these connections, trees can share water, nutrients, and chemical signals. But the true magic happens through their fungal partners. These fungi, specifically mycorrhizal fungi, form symbiotic relationships with the roots of numerous plants, including trees. They insert delicate structures resembling threads into the soil as hyphae, significantly expanding the plant's access to minerals and water. In return, the tree supplies the fungi with sugars produced through photosynthesis. It's a win-win partnership. However, it does not end there. These fungal networks don't just connect a tree to its fungal friend. Numerous trees are frequently linked together by them, forming what scientists call a common mycorrhizal network. The Wood Wide Web is a nickname for this, and the comparison to the internet isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. Through this underground network, trees can share resources and information across considerable distances. For example, if one tree is struggling, for instance, neighboring trees might shift their sugar exports through the fungal network in response to drought or insect infestation to help support it. This happens especially often between parent trees and their offspring. A large established tree may funnel resources to smaller saplings nearby, particularly if they're genetically related. This kind of support helps young trees survive in the dense shade of the forest floor until they can reach enough light to begin thriving on their own. Some trees even seem to recognize their kin in Laboratory experiments. Researchers have found that seedlings growing near siblings allocate resources differently than those growing near unrelated individuals. Kin plants are less competitive and more cooperative. It's a gentle form of favoritism, a subtle form of nepotism at the root level that helps ensure literally the family tree's success. However, this underworld kindness is not limited to family members. In some cases, trees of different species appear to exchange nutrients, especially when environmental conditions vary across the forest. A fast-growing species that captures lots of light might share sugars with a shade-tolerant neighbor that has better access to water or nutrients. The forest transforms into a collaborative economy in which trees become less competitive and more cooperative, like members of a diverse and dynamic community. Still, not everything about tree communication is cooperative. There are also chemical skirmishes and boundary disputes. Some trees release allopathic compounds into the soil, chemicals that inhibit the growth of competitors nearby. This strategy helps reduce competition for light, water, and nutrients. Black walnut trees, for example, produce a compound called juglone, which is toxic to many other plant species. It's a botanical version of building a fence and hanging a keep-out sign. But when it comes to long-term survival, collaboration frequently prevails. Forests thrive not because of ruthless competition, but because of balance. A wide variety of trees in a forest species and age groups is more resilient to pests, diseases, and environmental stress. The web of connections that connects both chemical and fungal, acting as an ecosystem-wide immune system by transmitting along signals and shoring up weak points. These connections may even carry information that resembles memory. Trees can recall previous droughts by altering their behavior in response to previous stress. For instance, a tree that has experienced a dry period may respond more strongly and quickly to future drought. This isn't memory in the neural sense, but it's a kind of physiological preparedness. The tree's internal chemistry, its gene expression, and even its growth patterns change in ways that show how it used to be. Tree rings are another form of memory, one that humans have been reading for centuries. Each ring represents a year of growth, and by studying the width, scientists can learn about past climate patterns, forest fires, and diseases from the composition of these rings, outbreaks, and more. In drought years, the rings are narrow. In wet years, they are larger. Some rings bear scars from lightning strikes or insect infestations. In this sense, a tree is a living archive of its own life and the conditions it has endured. Trees maybe also store information in their tissues, chemical composition. Leaves, bark, and sap can all carry signatures of past events. For example, certain stress hormones may linger in a tree system for weeks or months after an attack. This helps the tree respond more quickly if the threat returns. It may also send signals to nearby trees, warning them to prepare. In this way, trees not only remember that they educate. This capacity for memory and communication becomes especially important when considering long-lived trees. Some species can live for hundreds, even thousands of years. A bristlecone pine in California is over 4,000 years old. A clonal colony of quaking aspen in Utah, known as pando, may be tens of thousands of years old if you count the shared root system. These trees have weathered changes in climate, survived fires and floods, and watched entire civilizations rise and fall. Their longevity depends in part on their ability to adapt and share resources between generations. In many indigenous cultures, trees are seen as teachers or elders, repositories of wisdom and knowledge. Previously regarded as a poetic metaphor, this viewpoint now appears more scientific. Grounded as never before, trees are conscious of their surroundings. They adapt to shifts. They communicate. They remember. They are not people, and their intelligence is not human. But they are far more complex and responsive than we used to believe. Even in their canopies, they are aware. In a few forests, trees of the same species will grow their branches in ways that avoid overlapping with their neighbors. This phenomenon, known as crown shyness, results in a striking pattern of narrow gaps between tree crowns when viewed from below. The exact cause is still debated. Some think it's a way to reduce the spread of pests. Others believe it minimizes physical damage from wind. But the result is a clear sign that trees respond to each other's presence even high above the ground. Trees also play a role in guiding the development of ecosystems. As they grow and die, they shape the soil, the light conditions, the moisture levels, and the entire microclimate around them. Their fallen leaves become mulch. Their roots hold soil in place. Birds can take refuge under their branches, insects, and countless other species, and is made when a large tree falls, opening in the canopy, allowing light to reach the forest floor and giving new plants a chance to grow. Even in death, a tree nourishes the life around it. In urban environments, trees take on additional roles. They reduce the heat island effect by providing shade and cooling the air through transpiration. They absorb carbon dioxide and pollutants. They reduce noise and buffer wind. And perhaps most importantly, they offer psychological benefits. Studies have shown that spending time near trees, whether in a park or simply walking along a tree-lined street, can help you feel better, lower your blood pressure, and reduce stress. Trees don't just make the environment healthier, they make us healthier, too. Therefore, the next time you're near a tree, think about this. You're in the presence of a being that may be older than your grandparents, connected to its neighbors, through a living network beneath the soil and shaped by years, sometimes centuries of experience. That tree may be quietly sharing sugars with a struggling sapling. It may be preparing for drought. It may be warning others of a threat. In its own quiet way, it might recall a 50-year-old fire. Trees don't speak with words, but they have a language all their own, written in chemicals, gestures, and time. It's a language we're only just beginning to understand, but one that has been spoken in forests and groves for millennia. They're not simply background scenery. They are participants, witnesses, and architects of life on Earth. And in a world that often feels loud and fast, trees offer something else. Patience. They teach us to slow down, to listen carefully, and to remember that growth is not always visible, that strength can be quiet, and that the roots we cannot see may be the most important connections of all. If you've ever seen a Venus flytrap in action, you'll know it's hard not to be impressed. There's something both delightful and slightly alarming about a plant snapping shut around an insect, as though nature decided to take a walk on the weird side. But the Venus flytrap is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to plants that eat meat. Across the globe, in bogs, swamps, and nutrient-poor soils, a curious band of botanical outliers have evolved to feast on animals. Not because they're bloodthirsty, of course, but because they had to come up with new ideas for dinner. Carnivorous plants, also called insectivorous plants, have evolved in environments in which the soil does not contain enough of the necessary nutrients, especially nitrogen and phosphorus. These plants, even though they still perform photosynthesis like their leafy cousins, it is not enough to meet all of their nutritional requirements. So, they've developed extraordinary adaptations to supplement their diet. In essence, a little animal has been added. Include protein in the menu. In addition, the techniques they employ to capture their prey range from mechanical full-blown to passive traps. Drama. Let's start with the showstopper, the Venus flytrap. The Venus flytrap looks like something invented by a person and is only found in a small area of the corollas in the United States. Science fiction writer. Each of its altered leaves has two lobes that split open wide, resembling hinged jaws. Tiny hair-like triggers on the inner surface. When an unsuspecting insect touches these hairs twice within about 20 seconds, the trap snaps shut. It is completely independent and one of the plant kingdom's fastest movements. Mechanical. No muscles, no nerves, just hydraulic pressure and clever geometry. Once closed, the trap seals tightly and begins to digest the unlucky insect. The plant releases enzymes that break down soft tissues, absorbing nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus. After about a week, the trap reopens, revealing the dry, indigestible parts of the insect's legs, wings, and exoskeletons were washed away or blown away by the wind. By rain. It's neat, efficient, and strangely elegant. The Venus flytrap is a classic example of an active trap, meaning it involves movement. But not all carnivorous plants go to such theatrical lengths. Some prefer a subtler approach. Enter the pitcher plants. There are numerous varieties of pitcher plants. And are found across several plant families, including Nepenthesia and Sarracenia. These plants create pitch-like deep vessels filled with digestive liquid. The inner walls are often slippery, and many produce nectar or scent to lure in insects. Once inside, the hapless visitor finds it difficult to escape. Some pitcher plants have downward-pointing hairs that make climbing back out nearly impossible. Others rely on waxy surfaces that become dangerously slick when wet. The trapped insect eventually drowns in the liquid at the bottom, where enzymes or symbiotic bacteria break down its body. The plant then absorbs the released nutrients through special cells lining the pitch. It's the botanical equivalent of a pit trap, and it works remarkably well. Nepenthes is one of the more substantial species. Raggers are known to catch small frogs, lizards, and even insects. Rodents. These are rare events, but they do happen, and they lend a certain gothic flair to the already dramatic world of carnivorous plants. Sundew employ yet another strategy. These charming little plants found on every continent except Antarctica look like something from a glitter-covered fantasy film. Their leaves are covered in fine glandular hairs tipped with droplets of sticky mucilage. To the human eye, it looks like morning dew, hence the name. But to an insect, it's a trap. When a bug lands, it becomes quickly stuck on the leaf. The more difficult it is, the entangled it becomes. In some species, the leaf actually curls around the prey to increase contact and digestive efficiency. The insect's body is broken up by secreting enzymes, and the leaf absorbs nutrients. Surface. It's a slow, glistening embrace, and one the insect won't survive. Bladderworts, on the other hand, have developed what might be the most sophisticated trapping mechanism of all. These aquatic or semi-aquatic plants produce tiny bladder-like structures on their stems. Each bladder has a trap, door sealed shut by pressure. When a small aquatic organism, like a mosquito, lava, or water flea, comes into contact with the delicate hairs near the trap's entrance, bladder snaps open in less than a millisecond, sucking in water and prey alike. It's the fastest known movement in the plant kingdom, and it all happens underwater, hidden from view. After the meal, the bladder slowly gets back to normal, getting ready for the next round. The corkscrew plant, on the other hand, is passive, trapped to new heights. It has underground leaves that spiral into tubes and is typically found in tropical regions. Tiny soil organisms enter through secretions-lured openings and become trapped in a twisted tunnel that only goes in one direction, downward. Eventually, they reach a chamber where there is digestion going on. These plants are difficult to observe directly because their traps are underground, but their mechanism is just as clever as their counterparts above ground. A remarkable thing these plants all have in common ability to convert animal protein into plant food. They do not simply digest fun. They do this to stay alive. In environments where the majority of other plants have trouble finding sufficient nitrogen or phosphorus, carnivorous plants have carved out a niche by adding protein to their otherwise green diet. And they do it well because of evolution. The enzymes used in digestion, proteases, phosphatases, and others are highly specialized and effective. Some plants even adjust their enzyme production based on what they've caught. For instance, if a plant captures a protein-rich insect, it may produce more proteases to dissect it. Upregulation may occur in the prey, if it has a lot of chitin production in chitinase instead. It's a level of biochemical flexibility that's rare in the plant kingdom. Some carnivorous plants also use microbial partners to aid in digestion. Certain pitcher plants harbor colonies of bacteria, fungi, or even small animals like mosquito larvae that help break down captured prey. In return, these guests receive a nutritiously stable environment to live in. It's a complex multi-seas arrangement, less predator and prey, more miniature ecosystem. Carnivory's evolutionary beginnings in plants are fascinating. Scientists believe that carnivorous traits have evolved independently multiple times across different lineages, which suggests that eating animals is a pretty good idea if your plant stuck in nutrient-deficient soil. The triggers for this evolutionary leap often involve environmental pressures, wetlands, bogs, or sandy habitats where essential nutrients are leached away or locked up in forms that plants can't easily use. Interestingly, carnivorous plants don't always rely on meat. They can photosynthesize and grow if there are plenty of nutrients. Grow just like any other plant. Some species become less carnivorous when conditions improve. In lab settings, they can survive without prey if given the right nutrients in the soil. This flexibility highlights how carnivory is a strategy, not an absolute requirement. It's a backup plan, a plan B that involves tiny jaws, slippery traps, and chemical digestion, but a plan. Nonetheless, many carnivorous plants, despite their exotic appeal, are surprisingly delicate. Many species are endangered or threatened due to habitat destruction, pollution, and illegal collection. Wetlands in particular are vulnerable ecosystems, and draining them for development or agriculture puts these individual plants in danger. Conservation efforts around the world aim to protect the habitats of carnivorous plants and educate the public about their ecological importance. And they're important not just for their quirky diets, but for the roles they play in their ecosystems. Carnivorous plants aid in the management of insect populations and provide homes for specialized animals and contribute to nutrient cycling in their habitats. Their presence is a sign of a unique and often fragile environment. They're also a source of endless fascination. Whether it's the spring-loaded snap of a Venus flytrap, the glistening tentacles of a sundew, or the deep mysterious pictures of a tropical nepenthes, these our conceptions of what a plant should be are challenged by plants. They're not just passive photosynthesizers. They're active hunters, quiet carnivores, green predators lurking in plain sight. So the next time you see one of these plants, whether in a botanical garden, a nature documentary, or sitting quietly on someone's windowsill, remember that you're looking at something rare and extraordinary. A plant that bends the rules, a leaf with a secret, a living paradox that blurs the line between flora and fauna. And somewhere out there, an insect is advancing toward a picture with a sweet scent, completely unaware that this particular flower is not providing hospitality. It's offering lunch, just not in the way the visitor expected. From the icy peaks of mountain ranges to the sizzling sands of deserts, from brackish mangrove swamps to acidic bogs, plants have found a way to survive in nearly every corner of the planet. And not just survive, thrive, adapt, and even look fabulous while doing so. These are the daring botanists, the acrobats of evolution of the plant world. They're extreme in the truest sense. Not because they're marginalized by life, but because they're looking for adventure. And as a result, they've come up with some of the most bizarre, creative, and even downright bizarre ideas. Adaptations in all of biology. Let's begin in one of the most punishing environments imaginable, the desert. The word alone conjures images of blistering sun, scorching sand, and ironically, a desperate lack of water. And yet, deserts are home to an astonishing array of plant life. Chief among them are the succulents, a group of plants that have evolved to hoard water like it's gold. Cacti are perhaps the most iconic desert plants, and for good reason. They're Thick, fleshy stems serve as reservoirs, storing water during the rare occasions when rain does fall. Their leaves have been reduced to spines, which not only discourage thirsty herbivores but also reduce water loss by minimizing surface area. The outer skin is often coated in a waxy substance that helps prevent evaporation, and many species open their stomata only at night to avoid losing moisture in the daytime heat, a strategy known as CM photosynthesis, short for cancellation acid metabolism. But cacti aren't the only ones with desert survival smarts. Aloe, agave, and euphorbia species have evolved similar strategies despite belonging to different plant families. This is a stunning illustration of convergent evolution, where unrelated species independently evolve similar traits to cope with similar challenges. In other words, nature figured out the same answer to the same question several times over. Also, don't forget the resurrection plants. These amazing plants, like Siligonella lepida, serve as filler, can survive being almost completely dried out. They appear as tight, brittle balls during droughts. Dead. However, if you splash them with water, they will soon uncurl and turn green and resume photosynthesis. It's not a resurrection in the spiritual sense, but it's about as close as a plant can become, transitioning from dry heat to dry cold. Let's travel to the alpine tundra and polar regions where low temperatures and short growing seasons challenge even the hardiest of flora. Here plants have to be compact, efficient, and incredibly resilient. Many alpine plants grow low to the ground in cushion-like shapes, which help reduce heat loss and protect them from wind. Their thin, small leaves, which keep moisture in, frequently have fine hairs that trap heat and reduce frost damage. Take the moss campion, for example. It's a tight, mound-shaped plant, found in Arctic and alpine regions. Its structure creates a warmer microclimate within the cushion, allowing it to photosynthesize even in frigid temperatures. Or consider the Arctic poppy, which tracks the sun like a solar dish and has translucent petals that act like little green houses warming the reproductive organs inside. And then there's the ancient bristlecone pine. Some individuals have been alive for over 4,000 years, making them some of the oldest living organisms on Earth. These trees grow slowly in high, dry mountain ranges where few others can compete. Their secret lies in their dense, resin-rich wood, which resists insects, fungi, and decay. Even dead sections of the tree can remain standing for thousands of years, weathered but unbowed. Now, let's head to the other extreme. Waterlogged and nutrient-poor environments like bogs and swamps. Here, oxygen is scarce in the soil and nutrients are often locked up in decaying organic matter. To cope, many plants have evolved specialized structures that allow them to breathe and absorb nutrients in unconventional ways. Mangroves are a textbook example of this kind of adaptation. Found in tropical coastal areas, these trees thrive in salty, swampy conditions that would kill most other plants. Mangroves have developed aerial roots called nematophores that stick up out of the mud like snorkels, allowing the plant to access oxygen despite the presence of waterlogged soil. Their roots also excrete excess salt and stabilize the shoreline against erosion. Bogs present a different challenge. With their acidic, nutrient-poor soils, they are inhospitable to many plants. But some, like the carnivorous sundews and pitcher plants, have turned to alternative sources of nutrition, namely insects. These plants have already shown up on our journey, but it's still important to mention them again here, because their carnivory evolved specifically because of the harsh, nutrient-poor conditions in bogs. When the soil offers little, they look to the sky and the insects that buzz above it for food. Now imagine trying to grow in soil that's not just wet, but salty. Salty enough to make even your tears wheeze. This is the reality for halopites, or salt-loving plants that grow in salt flats, coastal marshes, and saline deserts. These plants have developed incredible mechanisms for dealing with high salinity, which would normally dehydrate plant cells by drawing water out through osmosis. Some halophytes excrete salt through specialized glands on their leaves, creating a sparkling crust that can be washed away by rain. Others keep the salt in older leaves that eventually drop off, taking the excess with them. One famous example is Salicornia, also known as sea asparagus or glasswort. This salt marsh-adapted plant is even eatable. It tastes unsurprisingly a bit salty. And while we're talking about unusual growing conditions, let's not ignore the high-flying plants, epiphytes. These are plants that grow not in soil, but on other plants, usually high up in the canopy. They're not parasites. They do not steal nutrients from their hosts, but they do benefit from improved light and airflow by living above ground. Orchids, bromelads, and some types of ferns are classic examples. They collect water and nutrients from rain, dust, and decaying matter that accumulates in specialized leaf structures or crevices. Some bromelads, like the tank bromelads, form a central reservoir that holds rainwater and provides habitat for insects, frogs, and even small snakes. It's like a tiny rainforest within a single plant. Speaking of living off the air, let's talk about air plants, specifically members of the genus Tansea. These plants absorb water and nutrients directly through their leaves and don't need soil at all. They're masters of minimalism, thriving in environments where most other plants would dry up and blow away. Another fascinating group of plants has adapted to life on rocks, literally. Lithophytes grow in rocky crevices where soil is minimal, relying on rainwater, moss, and lichen to provide a foothold and some nutrients. Although they are short, their roots are strong and secure the plant against wind and erosion. These determined little botanists might be seen clinging to cliff sides, basking in the sun like fearless mountaineers. The plants that inhabit fire-prone regions are the next category. In Australian bushlands, certain American forests, Mediterranean climates, wildfires are a regular occurrence. Instead of fearing fire, some plants have embraced it. Many pine species have serotinous cones that only release seeds in response to the heat of a fire. The flames enrich and eliminate rivals. The soil with ash, giving the next generation a clean slate and a nutrient boost. Other species like the fire poppy or certain types of eucalyptus sprout quickly after fire, taking advantage of the sudden burst of light in space. These plants are a part of an ecosystem that relies on fire, where destruction is not the end, but rather a necessary component of renewal. In environments where flooding is common, like monsoon plains or seasonal wetlands, some plants have evolved to float. Water, iris, and duckweed all have buoyant tissues that allow them to live on the surface of water, absorbing nutrients for whatever floats by. Their roots dangle freely in the water column, while their leaves and flowers bask in the sun above. The lotus, in particular, is a marvel. Its leaves are coated in a waxy layer that repels water, causing droplets to bead up and roll off, taking dirt and microbes with them. This self-cleaning effect, known as the lotus effect, has even inspired waterproof materials in human engineering. Sometimes the solutions nature invents are so efficient we end up borrowing them. Of course, extreme relationships frequently accompany extreme environments. Several plants formed close relationships with fungi, bacteria, or animals in order to assist them in coping with their environment. Mycorrhizal fungi help plants get to nutrients that are hard to get to. Nitrogen fixing bacteria alive in the roots of legumes, converting atmospheric nitrogen into a usable form. And mutualistic relationships with ants, birds, or bats can provide protection or pollination services in exchange for shelter or food. These alliances highlight an important theme in the world of extreme plants: flexibility. Whether it's storing water, excreting salt, dodging fire, or recruiting allies, plants have shown an astonishing capacity to adapt. They bend, but don't break. They improvise. They innovate, and sometimes they just hunker down and wait out the storm. So next time you're walking across a patch of rocky ground, take a break as you travel through a swampy ditch or marvel at a mountain's blasted slope. An in-depth look. Despite their lack of flash, the plants you see are survivors. They've turned adversity into opportunity, harshness into home, and they do it all without complaint, without fuss, and often without anyone even noticing. In their quiet way, they remind us that life does not always go as planned. Sometimes it takes root in the cracks, blooms in the margins, and thrives in places no one thought possible. The pioneers of the plant world are these: tough, resourceful, and endlessly creative. And in their resilience, they convey a valuable lesson. That being rooted does not necessarily mean being stowed away, and that sometimes the most difficult places give rise to the most extraordinary lives. Every great drama has its finale, and in the world of plants, that finale is reproduction. Whether it's a showy explosion of petals and scent, or a quiet, wind-blown whisper of pollen, plants take the business of making more plants very seriously. It's not just about spreading seeds. It's about strategy, timing, survival, and a touch. A flamingo. Because let's face it, even for a creature rooted to the spot, reproduction is a high-stakes adventure. At the heart of it all is the flower. Part beauty pageant, part biochemical factory, and part matchmaking agency. The flower is where plants combine function and finesse to achieve their ultimate goal, genetic continuity. For most flowering plants, reproduction is a sexual affair involving male and female structures, often conveniently located on the same bloom. The male parts of a flower are known as the stamens. Each stamen consists of a filament topped with an anther which produces pollen. Pollen grains carry the plant's male gametes, essentially its version of sperm. The female part of the flower is called the pistil or carpel. At its tip is the stigma, a sticky landing pad designed to catch pollen. Below that is the style, a slender stalk that leads to the ovary, where ovules, the eggs of the plant, are awaiting. When pollen lands on the right stigma, a pollen tube grows down the style to deliver the sperm cells to the ovule. If all goes well, fertilization occurs, and a seed begins to form. Around that seed, in many species, a fruit develops, providing protection, nourishment, and perhaps most importantly, a vehicle for dispersal. Now, some plants are perfectly happy to pollinate themselves. This is called self-pollination, and it has the benefit of being reliable. You don't have to wait for bees or breezes or anything else. Simply proceed to fertilize your own ovules. It's quick, efficient, and in some cases life-saving in isolated environments where pollinators are scarce. But most flowering plants prefer cross-pollination, getting pollen from another individual. This leads to greater genetic diversity, which means healthier offspring, more adaptability, and a better shot at weathering whatever life throws their way. Cross-pollination does require a go-between, and that's where pollinators come in. We've already explored how flowers attract bees, birds, and bats with color, scent, and nectar. But beyond, plants have also developed intricate mechanisms to ensure that their pollen reaches its intended destination by luring in helpers. Some flowers have explosive stamens that catapult pollen onto visiting insects. Others use traps, timing, or temperature-sensitive petals to control access to their reproductive parts. In the case of the bucket orchid, things get downright theatrical. This flower has a slippery, waxy lip that causes visiting bees to fall into a fluid-filled bucket. The only way out is through a narrow tunnel, and as the bee wriggles through, it gets coated with pollen. It's a bit undignified, but extremely effective. Once fertilization occurs, the next phase begins. Seed development. Seeds are botanical time. Capsules. Dormant embryos stuffed to the brim with everything they need to begin a new life. They contain a protective outer coat, a food reserve, and a tiny plant embryo with a root, shoot, and leaf, or two, just waiting to emerge. But of course, seeds are only useful if they end up somewhere they can grow. That, which brings us to the seed dispersal topic, which is just as fascinating. Amazingly, plants have developed a wide variety of strategies for releasing their children into the world, frequently involving a lot more drama than one might expect from humble seed. A few rely on the wind. These seeds are lightweight, often equipped with wings, hairs, or parachutes. Consider dandelions, whose seeds are carried in the air, on fluffy tuft like miniature hot air balloons, or maple keys, which spin to the ground in lazy circles. These designs increase the chances of finding new suitable ground far from the shadow of the parent plant. Other seeds are launched with force. The touch-me-not plant, for example, has seed pods that burst open at the slightest touch, flinging seeds in all directions. The sandbox tree, sometimes called the dynamite tree, takes this concept to new heights. Its large fruit pods explode with loud bang, sending seeds flying at speeds of up to 150 miles per hour. It's plant reproduction with a side of pyrotechnics. Some plants use water. Coconut palms drop their seeds, yes, coconuts, into the sea where they float, for a number of weeks or even months before crashing to the ocean floor. Waterlilies release seeds that drift gently away with the current. For plants living near rivers, lakes, or oceans, water is a perfectly judicious career guidance, but the most charming and diverse method of seed dispersal involves animals. This can occur in a number of different ways. Some seeds are encased in delicious fruits. When the animal consumes the fruit, digests the seed, and then deposits it, frequently far from where it came from. Plant, amidst a beautiful heap of fertilizer. Countless cherries, bananas, and figs. This is how other fruits work. And many seeds are specially adapted to survive a trip through the guts of a bird or mammal. Other seeds hitch rides. Birds, those tiny hook-covered troublemakers, only wear socks, feathers, and fur. Their design was even the inspiration for Velcro. The concept is simple. Attach yourself to a moving creature and drop off when conditions seem right. It's slow but steady and often remarkably successful. Some seeds are stored by animals, squirrels for example, that bury nuts for later, if they forget a cache or don't retrieve it. The seed has a chance to germinate over time. This method is especially important for too large seeds, heavy to travel by wind or water. But dispersal isn't just about getting away from the parent plant. Also, it's about finding the right conditions. Soil, light, moisture, and temperature all to align. Many seeds remain dormant for months or even years, waiting for the ideal moment. Some need a cold period to mimic winter. Others require heat to crack open their hard coats. Some require water, sunlight, or even passage through an animal's digestive system to trigger germination. It's a delicate, patient process. Once the seed germinates, the cycle begins again. The minuscule root, or radicle, descends, anchoring the plant and seeking water. The shoot emerges, reaching upward toward light. Leaves unfurl, chloroplasts activate, and before long, the plant is photosynthesizing, growing, and preparing to flower in its own time. Some plants do not reproduce with flowers, of course. Rather than seeds, many algae, mosses, and ferns use spores. These tiny reproductive units are produced in staggering numbers and scattered by wind or water. Some ferns produce millions of spores in a single growing season, banking on probability rather than packaging. Gymnosperms, like firs and pines, also act in slightly different ways. Cones are what they rely on instead of flowers. Male cones release pollen, which is carried by the wind, to female cones. It's less targeted than using pollinators, but in forests populated with the same species, it functions adequately. And then there are plants that skip sexual reproduction altogether. Many produce runners, tubers, or bulbs through asexual reproduction to fabricate clones of oneself. Strawberries, potatoes, and garlic all do this. It is quick, effective, and guarantees identical offspring to the parent. It is in stable environments winning strategy. Some species combine strategies. They may flower and produce seeds while also sending out runners or bulbils. This kind of reproductive belt and braces approach ensures survival across a range of conditions. If one method fails, another might succeed. Even more fascinating are some, depending on their environment, plants change how they reproduce. A plant might reproduce sexually in good years, when pollinators are abundant and conditions are favorable, and switch to asexual methods during stressful times. It's a remarkable flexibility for something rooted in place. It's possible that plant reproduction lacks drama. Animal courtship. No peacocks, no serenades, no territorial jewels, but it more than makes up for it in diversity, ingenuity, and sheer persistence. Flowers may look delicate, but their strategic superpowers, seeds, may seem simple, but they're time-traveling vessels of genetic potential, and the whole system is finely tuned to the rhythms of seasons, climate, and community. The quiet resilience with which plants approach reproduction is perhaps the most inspiring aspect. They don't rush. They don't push. They time their efforts carefully, sometimes waiting years for the right moment. And when that moment comes, they bloom, disperse, and begin again quietly, confidently, and with astounding imagination. So, next time you walk through a meadow or a forest, or even your own garden, take a moment to consider the stories unfolding around you. That dandelion puff drifting on the breeze. It's a single chapter in an ancient narrative. Your salad's tomato, a cautious packaged bundle of seeds wrapped in evolutionary marketing. And that oak tree dropping acorns. An expert in patience placing bets on the future with each and every nut. Plants have been perfecting the art of reproduction for over 400 million years. And their legacy surrounds us in every seed, every sprout, every flower. It's not just biology. It's quiet brilliance in bloom. Somewhere in a laboratory tucked behind flasks, grow lights, and a suspiciously contental-looking filler end, a revolution is underway. While many of us know plants as garden inhabitants, salad components, or the thing we keep forgetting to water in the corner of the living room, scientists have come to see them as something more, a gateway to solving some of humanity's biggest challenges. Plants are not just passive greenery. They're complex biological powerhouses with talents that range from air purification to solar energy conversion. And as we learn more about their inner workings, we're finding that the secret life of plants holds immense potential. For the future of science, technology, medicine, and even space travel. Let's start with a favorite subject of environmentally conscious minds everywhere. Climate change. Plants have managed carbon dioxide in secret for hundreds of millions of years. Through the process of photosynthesis, they absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and convert it into sugars, releasing oxygen in the process. Forests, grasslands, and oceans full of phytoplankton have a huge carbon sink effect, natural systems that absorb more carbon than they emit. But scientists are now exploring ways to enhance this natural capacity. Through genetic, using engineering and selective breeding, scientists are creating super plants that can absorb more nutrients and grow faster, carbon, or store it deeper in the soil. One example is modifying the root systems of crops so that more carbon stays underground, potentially locking it away for years or even centuries. It's a kind of botanical bank account, protecting carbon from atmospheric circulation by sequestering it. There's also work being done to optimize the photosynthesis process itself. While photosynthesis is miraculous, it's not especially effective. A plant only converts a small portion of the sunlight it receives into usable energy. Scientists are experimenting with ways to tweak the biochemical pathway of photosynthesis to increase that efficiency. If successful, such improvements could lead to faster-growing crops that require less land, less water, and fewer chemical inputs, helping to feed expanding the world's population without running out of natural resources. And speaking of food, let's talk about agriculture, because plants, after all, are the foundation of every dinner plate. Modern farming faces a laundry list of obstacles: climate unpredictability, soil degradation, water scarcity, and increasing demand from a swelling population. But once again, plants may be part of the solution. One promising area of research is vertical farming and controlled environment agriculture. These systems allow crops to be grown indoors, stacked in layers, and carefully monitored using sensors, automation, and LED lighting tuned to exactly the right wavelengths. Crops grow faster, use less water, and require no insecticides. And since the farms can be located in cities or harsh environments, they reduce the need for long-distance transportation. Imagine fresh strawberries grown in a skyscraper in the middle of a desert. Thanks to plant science, that's not science fiction anymore. There's also growing interest in perennial crops, plants that don't need to be replanted every year. Most of our major food crops like wheat, rice, and corn are annuals. That means farmers have to plow, sow, fertilize, and harvest from scratch every season. Perennials, on the other hand, stay in the ground year after year, reducing erosion, improving soil health, and requiring fewer inputs. Scientists are working on developing perennial versions of staple crops, which could lead to more sustainable agriculture systems around the world. However, plants are more than just food. They're also medicine cabinets. Over 50% of modern pharmaceuticals have their origins in compounds found in plants. From aspirin, which traces its roots to willow bark, to cancer-fighting drugs derived from the Madagascar periwinkle. Plants have been quietly saving lives for centuries, and researchers continue to search the plant world for new treatments. In the rainforest of the Amazon, the jungles of Southeast Asia, and even the forests of the Pacific Northwest, undiscovered plant species may hold the keys to treating diseases we haven't even heard of yet. Ethnobotanists, scientists who study how people use plants in traditional medicine, work closely with indigenous communities to learn about these remedies, combining ancient knowledge with modern laboratory tools to identify active ingredients and bring them to the world. However, we don't have to go to the jungle to find plant innovation. In fact, some of it is happening in test tubes. Synthetic biology, a field that combines biology and engineering, is allowing scientists to redesign plants from the inside out. By inserting or editing specific genes, researchers can create plants that glow, produce vaccines, or clean up toxic waste. One exciting example is phytoremediation, the use of plants to clean up environmental pollutants. Certain species like sunflowers and popular trees are particularly good at absorbing soil and water contaminated with heavy metals, radioactive materials, and other toxins. These green vacuums have been used to help clean up areas affected by industrial spills and nuclear disasters, offering a sustainable and less expensive than mechanical cleaning techniques. Other scientists are exploring ways to use plants as bofactories. Imagine a field of tobacco plants genetically engineered to produce life-saving drugs instead of nicotine, or rice plants that contain additional nutrients to help prevent malnutrition. These innovations are still being refined, but they represent a future where farming doesn't just mean growing food. It could also mean growing medicine, vaccines, or even biodegradable plastics. And then there's the problem of space. As we look toward the moon, Mars, and beyond, we're going to need to bring a little green with us. Plants are key to life support systems in space because they recycle carbon dioxide, produce oxygen, and can provide nourishment for astronauts. NASA and other space agencies have been studying how plants grow in zero gravity, under artificial lighting, and in confined environments. Experiments aboard the International Space Station have shown that plants can adapt surprisingly well to microgravity. Lettuce, radishes, zinnias, and wheat have all been successfully grown in orbit. And it turns out that watching a flower bloom in space is good for more than just oxygen. It's good for morale. There's something psychologically comforting about greenery, especially when you're millions of miles from Earth. In the future, self-sustaining habitats on Mars or the Moon will likely include greenhouses filled with crops carefully monitored by sensors and maybe even managed by robotic gardeners. Researchers are already developing soil substitutes that simulate Martian regolith, testing which plant varieties can thrive in low light, low pressure conditions. It's a slow process, but it's a necessary one, because when you're building a future off-world, a potato might be more valuable than a spaceship. Back on Earth, plants are being woven into the infrastructure of cities. Urban planners and architects are incorporating living walls, green roofs, and tree-lined streets, not just for aesthetics, but for their tangible benefits. Trees cool the air through transpiration, reduce noise pollution, sequester carbon, and improve mental health. Rooftop gardens help manage storm water runoff and insulate buildings, reducing energy use. In the age of climate anxiety, cities that embrace green space aren't just more beautiful, they're more resilient. And then there's the cultural and emotional role of plants. Botanical gardens house plants, and even the humble backyard veggie patch offer a sense of connection to nature. Studies show that spending time around plants can lower cortisol levels, improve concentration, and boost mood. During challenging times like, say, a global pandemic, people turn to gardening not just for food security, but for comfort and control. Plants have been with us since the beginning. They gave us the oxygen we breathe, the food we eat, the medicine we rely on, and the materials we use to build our lives. Additionally, they are now assisting us in the design of a greener, cleaner, more sustainable, and perhaps even interplanetary. What makes plants so astonishing is not just their quiet beauty or long history, but their adaptability. They are chemical engineers, energy converters, environmental cleaners, architects of ecosystems, and silent healers. Their talents stretch from the rainforest canopy to the cold vacuum of space. So, as we move forward into an age of biotechnology, artificial intelligence, and global transformation, it's worth remembering that some of the most powerful tools at our disposal are still the ones with roots, leaves, and chloroplasts. We spent centuries studying them, cultivating them, and sometimes taking them for granted. But it seems clear now the future is going to be a lot more plant-shaped than we imagined. And that's a very good thing, because whether it's a sunflower following the arc of the sun, a lab-grown rice plant enhanced, whether it's a tiny lettuce leaf on a space station or a drought-resistant plant, each one is a tiny green wonder, part of a story still unfolding, still growing, still reaching for the light. We often look at plants and think of them as background characters, scenery to the main event, the green blur behind all the animal drama. But the more we learn about them, the more we realize that plants are not just silent witnesses to life. They are life. Additionally, they are not merely performing photosynthetic activities. The line between instinct and something else is being blurred as they respond, interact, learn, and evolve in ways that, if you squint just right, almost looks like intelligence. Now, to be clear, plants don't have brains. They don't think or feel in any way that resembles human consciousness, but they do process information. They gather it constantly from light, gravity, chemicals, touch, and even sound. And they respond in complex, often surprisingly adaptive ways. As a result, scientists have proposed plant intelligence as a real concept rather than a poetic metaphor. Biological concept. Let's begin with a familiar object. Movement. Most of us think of plants as immobile, but given the right time, scale, they're anything but. Light is moved toward by plants. They twist around support structures. They open and close in response to touch, temperature, and humidity. These movements are often the result of growth responses, like a stem bending toward a window or a vine coiling around a trellis. But in some cases, the movements are rapid, like the famous snap of the Venus flytrap or the folding of a sensitive mimosa. These responses are highly specific and coordinated. When a Venus flytraps, when trigger hairs are touched, the plant does not immediately clamp down. It counts. It waits for a second touch, within a certain window of time before activating the trap. This double trigger mechanism helps reduce false alarms. That's not just a reflex. This is a decision M process, albeit a simple one. But decision M is just the start. Plants can also learn. One famous experiment involved the sensitive plant mimosa pudica, which closes its leaves when touched, a clear defense mechanism. In a study, researchers repeatedly dropped the plants from a short height, a non-damaging but startling experience. At first, the plants closed their leaves in response, but after several repetitions, they stopped responding. They had learned that this particular stimulus wasn't harmful. Even more intriguingly, when tested days, or even, the plants still remembered a few weeks later. They didn't close their leaves when dropped. That's not memory in a human sense, but it is a form of retained response to a learned experience. Now, if that isn't enough to make you question the idea of plants' intelligence, consider that plants can also make trade-offs. When under attack by herbivores, some plants reduce their investment in reproduction and divert resources to defense, producing more toxins or thicker leaves. Others, faced with crowding by nearby plants, will change their growth angle, growing taller or bending sideways to escape shade. These are strategic decisions that are influenced by data from the environment. Again, no brain, just distributed intelligence spread out across cells, tissues, and root systems. And speaking of roots, those subterranean explorers are where a lot of this processing is carried out. Roots are sensitive to gravity, moisture, pressure, and even chemical gradients. They don't just appear out of nowhere. They forage. They sample the soil and grow toward pockets of water or nutrients. They avoid toxins and navigate around obstacles. Some studies suggest that roots can even detect the presence of other roots nearby and adjust their growth to avoid competition or, in the case of kin, to allow cooperation. Roots are also key players in communication. Through the mycorrhizal networks, the so-called Wood Wide Web, plants can send and receive chemical messages, alerting one another to threats like insect attacks or drought. These messages often result in the receiving plant boosting its own defenses before the threat even arrives. That's not just passive signaling. That's proactive behavior. But communication doesn't stop underground. Plants release volatile organic compounds into the air that can act as distress calls or attractors. A plant that caterpillars are eating might emit a scent that not only warns neighboring plants, but attract parasitic wasps to deal with the pests. It is amazing how complicated these chemical signals are. Different blends for different attackers, even modified by the plant's previous experiences. Some researchers have gone a step further, suggesting that plants might even have something akin to a nervous system. Not in the traditional sense. There are no neurons, no synapses, but plants do use electrical signals to transmit information. When a Venus flytrap closes or when a wound occurs, electrical impulses known as action potentials travel through the plant. These signals move more slowly than in. However, they are able to coordinate responses across the organism. For example, if one part of a plant is, before the attackers arrive, injured, distant tissues may begin producing defense compounds. There's even emerging evidence that plants can detect and respond to sound. In laboratory conditions, roots have been shown to grow toward the sound of running water, even when no moisture is present. Plants may alter, according to other studies, gene expression in response to certain frequencies of sound. It's not yet clear how plants detect these vibrations, perhaps through mechanosensitive proteins. But the possibility that they can hear in a broad sense is one more layer of intrigue. All of this leads us to a philosophical question. What is intelligence? If we define it as the ability to solve problems, respond to the environment, and adapt to new challenges, then plants certainly qualify. Their intelligence is not centralized like a brain. It's decentralized, modular, and highly specialized. Each part of a plant gathers and processes information relevant to its role. Leaves monitor light and gas exchange. Roots assess soil conditions. Flowers respond to pollinator visits. In this way, A plant behaves more like a network than a single organism. It's a living system of sensors and responders, constantly adjusting to optimize survival. And, perhaps most remarkably, it does all of this without moving from its spot. Imagine being forced to spend your entire life in one location and being unable to relocate when times got tough. You'd have to be very good at sensing, adjusting, and optimizing. That's what plants do every moment of every day. This redefinance isn't just academic. It's changing the way we approach plant science. Researchers are using models from artificial intelligence and computer networks to study plant signaling systems. Even robots, based on plant behavior, are being constructed by some. The idea is that by understanding how plants solve problems without a brain, we might find new approaches to designing intelligent systems in our own technologies. Plants are also inspiring new ways of thinking about sustainability. After all, they operate on entirely renewable energy, recycle their own waste, and cooperate with others to survive. They've been doing circular economy long before it was cool. And they do it all in a way that maintains balance in ecosystems, fosters biodiversity, and builds soil rather than depleting it. But perhaps the most humbling lesson from plant intelligence is this. Awareness doesn't require consciousness. A plant can act as if it is alive without knowing it is alive. It is not necessary for it to experience pain in order to avoid joy to seek light. The fact that their responses does not render them any less sophisticated. Emerge from structure and chemistry rather than emotion. This challenges our preconceived notions. We're used to seeing intelligence as something tied to movement, noise, or expression. But plants remind us that intelligence can be slow, silent, and deeply rooted. That awareness can be measured not in seconds, but in seasons. Therefore, the next time you're near a tree or tend to a potted herb, pause for a moment. You're not just looking at a passive being. You're looking at an organism that's monitoring its environment, calculating trade-offs, forming partnerships, and executing strategies for survival. You are observing a creature that, in its own private way, is thinking, but not in the manner you do. In a world that often prizes quick reactions, plants offer a different kind of wisdom than people do. A slower pace, a deeper awareness, a way of being that's not about dominance or display, but about listening, adapting, and enduring. They are not only a component of life. They are life expressed in green, in patience, in presence. Also, as we learn more about them, the distance between us and them may lessen. Rigid than we thought. Intelligence comes in many forms, and some of it is leafy, photosynthetic, and rooted right beneath our feet. At first glance, it might seem like the story of plants is a quiet one. No roars or howls, no thundering hooves or flashing teeth. But spend just a little time among them, whether it's in a forest, a garden, a windswept field, or the potted jungle on your windowsill, and you'll begin to sense something deeper. Plants are more than just beings that live. They exist, storytellers, and their stories are etched into landscapes, woven through history, and embedded in every breath we take. From the air's oxygen to the food on our plates, from the clothes we wear to the medicines we rely on, plants are significant individuals in the human epic. And increasingly, they're shaping the narrative about our future. Let's begin with something incredibly basic. Air. Every molecule of oxygen you breathe was made by plants or by their ancient aquatic cousins, photosynthetic algae. Billions of years ago, tiny cyanobacteria started releasing oxygen as a byproduct of photosynthesis. This changed the Earth's atmosphere over time, making it rich in the oxygen that complex life needs. The world as we know it, full of animals, fungi, and yes, people simply wouldn't exist without that quiet planetary makeover, led by plants. So, every breath you take is, in a very literal sense, a thank you. Note regarding photosynthesis, then there's the matter of food. It's easy to forget in the age of supermarkets and snack aisles that nearly every bite we eat begins with plants. Either we eat them directly, fruits, grains, vegetables, nuts, or we eat plants eating animals. Plants are the base of nearly every food chain. The primary producers that transform sunlight into nutrients and energy. One single, although a wheat or corn kernel, may not seem like much. When multiplied by billions, they form the foundation of global civilization. Consider rice. It's been cultivated for over 10,000 years, and today feeds more than half the world's population. Then there's wheat, the backbone of bread, pasta and pastries, and corn, which might masquerade as popcorn or sweet. Kernels at a barbecue, but also hides in everything from cooking oil to soft drinks to biodegradable plastics. These plants are more than crops. They're cultural icons, economic powerhouses, and essential threads in the fabric of daily life. But food is just the beginning. Take a quick inventory of your surroundings. The cotton top you're wearing, that's a plant. The wooden table, the paper in your notebook, the tea leaves steeping in your mug, all from plants. Even the walls of your home, if they're made of timber or the paint on them, or the rubber in your shoes, plants, and more plants. They construct space rather than merely filling it. Medically, plants are our oldest allies. Observation and herbal chemistry were the foundations of chemistry long before it became a science. Tradition. From willow bark, people learned to treat pain, eventually isolating salicin, the basis for aspirin. Taxol, a potent anti-cancer agent, arrived from the Pacific U. From rosemary leukemia treatment was revolutionized by periwinkle drugs. Every rainforest, every meadow, every compounds that haven't been found yet might be in forgotten hydro. Chemical stories waiting to be read. And plants are deeply ingrained in human culture, in addition to their practical applications. Peace is represented by olive branches. The lotus is a metaphor for purity and rebirth. The ochre is a symbol of strength and endurance. Every culture in the world, its sacred trees, its ceremonial plants, its healing herbs, and poetic flowers. They're woven into myths and folklore, religious rites, and seasonal festivals. In some cases, entire philosophies have grown from observing the life cycle of a tree or the opening of a flower. The Japanese concept of hanami, for example, celebrates the fleeting beauty of cherry blossoms. In that brief period lies a meditation on impermanence, change, and the beauty of the present moment. In India, the tulsi plant is revered in homes as both a deity and a healer. In Celtic traditions, groves of trees were considered sacred, natural temples where the divine could be encountered. Plants in these circumstances are musical, meaningful, and useful in addition to being useful. Instruments, like flutes, drums, and violins are made from plant materials, which transmit sounds in a way that plastic never could. And of course, many songs and poems have been inspired by the whisper of the wind in the trees, the rustling of leaves, or the perfume of a night blooming flower. Plants don't just shape our physical world, they shape our imagination. But despite all this, it's easy to overlook them. Plants operate on a different time scale than we do, which adds to the difficulty. Their changes are subtle, their gestures slow. A tree might take 50 years to reach maturity and live for centuries after that. A flower might open over the course of hours. A root system might expand over years. We must be able to clearly see plants by slow down. We have to pay attention, and in doing so, we often discover something else. A profound sense of calm, curiosity, and connection. This connection is more than emotional. It's biological. According to studies, spending time with plants lowers stress and lowering blood pressure and enhancing concentration. Hospital patients recover faster when they can see greenery from their windows. Children who play in natural environments tend to be more creative and enduring. Even office workers surrounded by indoor plants report greater satisfaction and well-being. This makes perfect sense when you think about the evolution of our species. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans lived in close contact with plants, not just for food and shelter, but for beauty, scent, and orientation. recognizing edible berries, spotting medicinal herbs, noticing seasonal changes in leaves. These skills were part of daily survival. And even now, somewhere deep in our brains, we respond to green spaces with a sigh of relief. The presence of plants is for many of us a sign that things are okay. Which brings us to the possibly most pressing portion of the narrative, the future as our planet faces climate change. Habitat loss and declining biodiversity, the role of plants becomes more critical than ever. The forest is not merely a home for animals. They are carbon sinks, climate regulators, and water managers. Wetlands protect coastlines and filter pollutants. Grasses hold soil in place and support pollinators. In every ecosystem, plants are the infrastructure, the foundation on which everything else rests. And yet, plant species are disappearing at an alarming rate. Many vanish without ever being formally described. Some could hold the key to curing disease or stabilizing degraded lands. Others simply play roles we haven't yet understood. The loss of plant biodiversity is not just an aesthetic or scientific tragedy. It's a real threat to the stability of ecosystems, economies, and communities. Still, there is hope. Around the world, people are working to protect and restore plant life. Indigenous, traditional plant knowledge is being protected by communities. Seed banks are preserving rare and heirloom varieties. Ecologists are ruining degraded landscapes with native flora. And everyday people, gardeners, teachers, artists, and students are reconnecting with the green world through community gardens, houseplants, and forest walks. Technology is also contributing. Genetic tools and imagery from satellites that monitor forest cover conserve rare species to hydroponic systems that grow food in deserts and cities. We're finding new ways to support plant life, even as we face unprecedented challenges. And all of this begins with awareness, with noticing the plant outside your window, with wondering why that leaf is shaped the way it is, with listening, really, listening to what the natural world is telling us. Plants may not speak our language, but they are always in conversation with their surroundings. If we take the time to observe, we can learn to read their signals, respond to their requirements, and perhaps even have their quiet wisdom alter you. Because in the end, the story of plants is not separate from ours. It is our story. It is the breath we share, the food we eat, the places we live, and the thoughts we think. It is the shade under which we rest, the bloom that marks celebration, the root that connects all living things. It is a story written in green, forming all around us and merely requesting our attention. So, wherever you are right now, pause for a moment on a forest trail, in a city apartment, close to or far from a garden. Find a plant, any plant. It might be a towering tree or a humble weed pushing through the cracks. Look at it closely. Let yourself feel that ancient connection, because its slow growth in its leaves and roots, life's unfolding, is a story that goes back to the beginning of time and continues to written with every seed, every stretch toward the light, and every sunrise. And so after drifting through chloroplast and root tips, secret scents, and snapping traps, we find ourselves back where we began, marveling at the silent, intricate, astonishing world of plants. What started as a simple exploration of green things has revealed something far more profound. These still beings, which are frequently ignored or reduced to decor, are among the most adaptable, essential, and fascinating life forms on Earth. They don't just survive. They shape worlds. They don't speak in words, but their language is written in sunlight, scent, movement, and memory. We've uncovered how they breathe for us, feed us, heal us, and inspire us. We've seen their cunning strategies, their hidden communication, their moments of brilliance in the darkness of night, and the blaze of day. They defend themselves, outsmart predators, plan for the future, and, albeit slowly, gain knowledge from experience. They create the ecosystems that support life. And now, perhaps more than ever, they hold some of the keys to humanity's path forward. So with all of this in mind, are you still awake? If you are, I hope it's not because I was too interesting. Though if I was, well, at least you've learned a few things about your leafy roommates along the way. And if you're already halfway to dreamland, may your thoughts be filled with forests that whisper and vines that stretch slowly across starlit skies. Before you drift off completely, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Drop a comment and share. Are you surrounded by houseplants, plants from the garden, or perhaps a slumbering cactus on your nightstand? And if you found this gentle journey into the world of plants relaxing or informative, or both, please do consider giving this video a like and subscribing to The Sleepy Scientist. It is a modest act that enables me to continue bringing you more calming, curious content from the natural world and beyond. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the secret life of plants. Relax, have a good night's sleep, and don't forget that the world blooming all around you quietly, patiently, beautifully. You simply must slow down to see it.